Good evening and welcome to Speakers Corner UK channel. Hopefully, we're very fortunate today to be able to do another live stream so soon. It just happens that Stops and I's calendars are available this evening, which is not always the case. It's not like we can plan weeks or months ahead necessarily, like other people can. So hopefully, this will be of value to you. So good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you may be, and a warm good evening to my, as always, co-host Stop Spamming. How are you, sir?
Hello, world. Yeah, it's unfortunate our periods have not synchronized, right?
No, no, exactly. So we just do what we can. This is a hobby and interest for us. It's not our daily job. I tell you what, if Stops and I did this full time, I mean, we can sort of handle ourselves, but we'd be a force to be reckoned with if this was our full time only thing we did. They would be, I think, running for the hills, I have to say.
Yeah,
But
but I
maybe
see
I,
that Harris is, for example, he's pushing out a huge amount of material at the moment, that it actually gets too much to listen to this all the time.
yeah.
And I don't know how much impact he's having. I thought he was having more of an impact when there was less, because then you were sort of more inclined to listen to everything that he had to say. Whereas now I am the one actually who's skipping things because it's simply too much. So I wonder if having this like once every day or twice a day or something isn't wouldn't be too much even. So I
I
don't
think
know.
Armin
This
Navabi is doing that as well, isn't it? But I think what I mean is that we could go into things even more deeply than we already do, right? Really take time out. At some point, it's in the back of my mind to do the Raymond Farron book and so forth, and you might have looked at it before. I know you've done in-depth studies at certain parts, but to bring that all together and to show it online, because it's all in mostly in your mind and little bits here and there in my mind, but to display that for the audience and not just talk about it, because otherwise it's just sort of
yeah.
it's not as engaging, and it doesn't, people don't remember it, they don't have references, etc. So if we had the time to do this full time where we could reference it, have the presentations up and really go at this full on,
Yeah, okay, this is
that
true.
would be
Yeah,
substantial.
I
But
just
like you say, you wouldn't have to do it every day. But anyway,
I just published one on this Alaka thing, and there I think it's very important to bring all the background, the whole all the whole tutti, the sources, the what does the Quran say, what does the Tafsir say, what does the Hadith say, what does the I don't know, tertiary
yeah,
literature say, and things like that. And I brought everything out, and if once you
yeah.
do that, I think there's no way that you can still weasel out of this one, but to do this here online is incredibly difficult, and so it makes more sense to do this offline and then prepare everything, script it, and then bring it together. So yeah.
Yeah, but I think the other thing that you and I can do reasonably, I don't claim that we're world class and we're the best in the world, but we can do okay in a live debate. And I'm always learning. I'm paying attention. I listen to you. I listen to other people. These critiques help me as well to notice patterns that I might otherwise
Yes.
miss. There's things that you'll say, okay, that's good. So I'm always learning. I'm also learning what my interlocutors do that are bad or that might be good that I can go away and look at or listen to or pick up on, and hopefully it's of value to some of the people who are listening. And of course, I sometimes learn from people in the text. They might say something, that's pretty good as well. So if you're in the text, send us through some messages. Let us know your thoughts. We're not perfect. We're not philosophical or theological scholars or anything like that. So there's potentially plenty we might miss or whatever the case. So we're going to do the best we can. Hopefully it's valuable, entertaining, educational. But by all
Right.
means, post stuff in the comments and let us know if you think that
Infotainment.
as we go through that we might have missed something or there's an extra point that you could add in the text. If I see it coming up, if I can, we'll bring it on screen or read it out because, well, like I say, we don't know everything. So with that said, let us bring this up now. Let's go bring him in.
Which reminds me, you haven't done my critique yet.
No, that's absolutely right. Maybe we should do it together at some point this week coming. Be nice to have you there as well, because I can also hear from you what is going through your mind at the time as well when you're saying X or Y, were you just frustrated or were you, what were your thoughts and
Yeah,
so on. So
if I can still
that's
remember.
always
Yeah.
valuable. All
Okay,
right, let's
let's hit
go
it.
over to here. I now won't be able to see the chat stops because I'm out and about
Okay,
this
I'll keep
evening.
an eye
So
out.
I'll ask you to keep an eye. I'll be looking at the video, stopping and starting it. So for people who are watching, this is sort of part two. You'll see the other one we did the other night. If you go back and have a look, part one is in the Speakers Corner channel. This is the next guy that came on directly after Rob MTT or whatever it is. And so now we're going to listen to the concerns this guy has and how he's responded to. And I did say to Stops, you will see in this particular session, preaching and so forth, like I've not seen in a stream that I can personally remember. So get ready for that towards the later stages. I'm just, strap yourselves in for a time where, they'll just be preaching to this guy as to why he should be converting and so on. But let me not, go too far ahead of ourselves. Let's get going in the beginning here. He's just joined now, so let's hear what he's got to say and his concerns and questions to the panel.
Hello, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
So I'm kind of disturbed by the idea of hell. And so from what I understand, if someone receives the message and doesn't believe and dies that way, they're, getting an unending punishment. Is that correct?
It would depend upon whether they thought it was true, so they were convinced that this actually is the truth, and then they do what is called kufr, which is to conceal the truth, to hide the truth, to deny the truth. And if they do that, then they've completely gone against their own acceptance of something on the basis of arrogance or whatever else it might be. Then you're in serious trouble, yes.
Well, why does that concern you, Dream?
Because I feel like it's more of a problem of just not being convinced. And it's not really a sort of inherent, like it's a problem of not being convinced. It's not really something you can control. It's sort of like this. It's not convincing. So
I don't believe it.
You don't believe what Dream is saying. What Dream is saying is that if you're not convinced, would the same thing apply to you as it would apply to somebody who was convinced? And the reality is that they would be treated differently.
No, I'm trying to understand Dream's position because he's concerned. He's the concern. So
yeah.
Are you concerned that you might be thrown in hell?
No, not right now. I mean, I don't believe it.
Okay. So what are you concerned about?
I'm just like looking into it, and it's a concerning topic.
No, but what's concerning you?
I guess concern is the wrong word.
Going there, are you? Are you concerned about going there?
I'd say yeah. I mean, if it's true, I would be, yeah.
Alhamdulillah. And you should be. And that's the whole point of it.
Yeah, but at the same time, I'd have a Christian telling me that, if I don't believe in Christianity, I'm going there.
We not Christians have the part. Don't worry about that, mate. The Christians have nothing to say.
The arrogance of this guy. This is Dunning-Kruger. We should contact Dunning-Kruger and say, hey, we've got a candidate for you to use for your studies. It's this guy who thinks he can, quote, knock Christians out of the park. I mean, he either is speaking to Christians who are lay people, or he's never spoken to any sort of sophisticated Christians. Now, I don't believe Christianity is true, but the cavalierness with which he claims that he can knock Christians out of the park, either he doesn't understand the arguments. If you put him up against somebody like Josh from Speaker's Corner, who's a really lovely guy, and he's got the philosophical arguments and stuff, and even, what's his name has tried it, Hijab, right? And Hijab couldn't follow along. It was just like he was left behind. What chance do you think Hamza will have? But he'll walk away from somebody like Josh thinking he's, quote, knocked it out the park. So, and I would never say I could do that to every single person. Well, I'll knock every Muslim out the park because I haven't spoken to all of them. I don't know their level. So to say something like that is either pure arrogance or he's using anecdotal evidence. And again, it depends on who he's been speaking to. But that sort of cavalier attitude that, Christianity is just a dead duck, from somebody like him who's not even remotely a scholar and probably the least well-read or quote-unquote intellectual on this panel, is just like, it just certainly rubs me up a little bit the wrong way, I have to say.
Sorry?
Okay, the Christian claims can be taken apart very easily. Yeah, their claims are based upon false premises, and we just expose the false premise, and from that point onwards,
the irony
about the threats.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And Christians have got a very sophisticated thing. Look, I don't believe them. But if you come up against a sophisticated Christian who's done years of study on this and kind of knows their topic, you're not going to just knock it out the park like he says. It'll go over his head. But if it was that easy, there wouldn't be Christians. There wouldn't be advanced apologetics that are much more advanced than the Muslim stuff. I mean, these guys look like kindergarten compared to the high-end, Christian apologists. Now, I'm not bigging them up in this, but I do recognize that they don't make, the basic fundamental errors and errors in logic that these guys make. They might not be, I won't be convinced of their arguments necessarily, but it's very rare that you'd find the high-end guys in the Christian who are going to make basic fallacious arguments, which these guys do regularly. And so, like you say, and it's exactly the same for them, but they don't realize it. It's fascinating, isn't it? The irony, as you say.
Threats of Christianity and not believing Jesus died for your sins.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's also coming from your perspective.
No, we can't do that. But this is the point. You see, we can do that to the Christians. You can't do that to Islam or the Quran. But you can try.
What do you mean?
Okay, you're concerned that if you're not convinced Islam is true, you could go to hell. Yeah.
Yeah, if the religion is true, yeah.
if the religion is true. Okay.
Yeah.
So what you should need to do is make sure find out if the religion is true or not.
Yeah, but I'm saying this concept doesn't make sense to me, and that's also something stopping me from believing it's true.
But which concept doesn't make sense?
Because I don't think that being convinced is something you can control. I feel like it's not really your fault, like if you don't believe something.
Just so you know, I used to be an atheist,
Okay.
I became convinced. So yes, you can be convinced. And many people are.
Okay, so he didn't quite elucidate it as clearly as he could, the dream guy. But what he's saying is that you can't choose your beliefs. You can't choose to be convinced. It's not like you can choose ice cream. Either you're convinced because you have good reasons to, or you could be convinced for bad reasons. But an easy example, what he could have brought up is an easy example. Hey, can you convince yourself that Santa Claus exists? Well, no, you can't. You can pretend to yourself, but you know that it isn't the case, and God would know this too. So it's not like you can choose to be convinced. That's what he's actually trying to say here. And Hamza is just saying, well, he's misunderstanding, of course, and thinking, well, he's saying that people can't be convinced. No, he's not saying that. He says what he is saying is that you can't choose to be convinced. You either are convinced or you're not, right? That's the point that he's making. And of course, he's being misunderstood.
Another way of saying it, I think, would be to change your mind. How do you change your mind? Well, you have somehow received information that makes you change your mind because you are now convinced of something else. That is something that you can do. But you can't go and say, I will not change my mind, but still pretend that I'm something else, and that doesn't work.
Yeah, and remember what the initial premise was, right? His initial sort of opening premise, the dream fella, is that, hey, if people do dawah and they speak to you about it and you are not convinced for whatever reason from them, you can go to hell for this, right? At least to some level. Abbas was trying to suggest that depends on whether you're convinced and then you don't do it. Well, maybe that's the case, maybe not.
Well, I think he was making the case of active-passive.
But if you're not convinced, having, let's say, Dream never heard of Islam, right? Then he could be judged in some other way, right? Potentially. But if he spoke to these guys on the panel and he ended up not being convinced because they weren't good at dawah or whatever the case may be, then then the punishment could be worse. That's the concern, as I understand it, that he's trying to voice here. It's not like he could choose to do it to avoid hell. He'd need to be convinced because obviously, presumably, God can read your thoughts and know whether you're telling the truth or whatever the case is. So you can't do, what's the argument stops where people, not Paley's watchmaker, the other one, Pascal's wager, right? Pascal's wager is, in my view, the straightforward version of it is intellectually dishonest. Hey, just believe because you've got nothing to lose and everything to gain. Well, you can't choose your beliefs, and that's kind of what he's talking about here. But Hamza isn't grasping that. So basically, if you didn't do dawah, that would be a better thing than doing dawah and somebody not being convinced because you're bad at dawah or whatever the case is. Then they could be destined for hell. That's the question he was kind of asking, and in his mind, it didn't make sense. And to some degree, I've got some sympathy with that.
People are convinced every day, alhamdulillah.
No, I'm not saying you can't be convinced. I'm saying if you're not convinced, it's not necessarily your fault.
No, well, okay. So if you're not convinced, what is it that you consider? What is it that you've not satisfied with the answers? What questions you ask and you don't get answers to? Why is it you reject the claims of Muhammad? Why do you reject the Quran? What is it? Why do you forget that? Do you believe in God?
Yeah, I do.
Alhamdulillah. So then you'll start from that perspective. Do you believe that God has communicated with the creation?
I'm not sure.
So you say, how would you know?
I don't know. I'm saying I'm not sure. I don't know.
All right. So, but there's men who've been in history claiming to be messengers of this creator, the God you believe in.
Yeah, but there's also men claiming to be talking to other gods or to some other version of God.
Right. So what would you do then if men claiming to be? What's your concept of God? What do you believe God is?
I just believe in a creator. I'd say that much.
What's your conception? What would you describe God?
I don't think I can. I just think it's a creator.
Do you believe God could be in the form of an animal and you worship that animal, or in a statue? Do you believe these things? Or do you believe God is outside of his creation?
I have no idea.
Well, what do you believe?
I believe that there's...
Okay. So he said he has no idea of the concept of God other than he's a creator. But he keeps pressing. When somebody says, I don't have any idea, move on. Don't keep asking the same question. Now he feels this guy's going to start saying something else now when he said he didn't have an idea. So it's almost like he's been bullying into saying something after the question has already been asked. If the guy says, I don't know, he doesn't know, right? Move on. Don't keep asking the question over and over so that he feels like he's forced to then say something that you can attack, because that wasn't his original thing. Normally, the first thing that people say is what they actually believe until you press them in this sort of thing.
There's a creator. That's what I believe.
But
And what
Rob,
creator? Is there creation or
just
creation?
a second. I'm a little bit stuck. What happens if you are a non-Christian, non-Muslim, non-anything, and you suddenly think, well, hang on, there's something missing here in my life because I don't understand how everything came into being, and I don't quite understand how everything can come from nothing. Let me speak to somebody who knows about these things. And you come across these guys, and they try and get you into Islam, but they're botching it up. So they're making, it's such a bad job that they are delivering that you are not going to be convinced. So you say, no, screw you. You guys have failed at convincing me that Islam is an option, and then you go to a Christian and he does a better job, and you go and you decide, well, the Christian God makes more sense. Is this God going to punish these guys for their incompetence, or is he going to go and say, hang on, I made a mistake because I created these people with insufficient knowledge to convince somebody else of my, I don't know, abilities or something? How does that work? How can a Muslim get this under their brain? How can they go and say, well, this is what's going to happen?
Yeah, and presumably you get punished for not being convinced from their bad argument. Because if
exactly, am I? Is this possible?
Who knows, right? I think it's better, again, we could bypass all of this with the bad apologetics and some guy wandering around the desert 1400 years ago. If God could reveal himself to everybody in some incontrovertible way, or
wouldn't
indeed
it make sense?
Evidence of God in this world, it didn't even have to be from humans, although first person, experience that's undeniable and can be verified in other ways is probably the most convincing thing you could ever have. But short of that, like I say, having an obelisk in the middle of Mecca that could answer any question, could appear, the brick could answer any question you want. It would come up in your own language. Anybody who touched in any language around the world, we all understand exactly the same thing. That would be quite impressive. I'd say, well, no human could do that. Maybe it's an advanced alien. But if it is, in fact, from a god, then that's certainly going to push me along the line, right? So there is ways that we can do this. But instead, as you say, we've got poor apologetics from some guy, that lived 1400 years ago, but people like this trying to represent this. But again, right, they're going to claim that it's not God's fault and it's not their fault. They're doing the best they can. But then presumably if the guy is not convinced and he's, quote, being intellectually honest, then does he get punished?
So it's
maybe
all
we should
down to
ask them and see what happens. What are they going to say, right?
Okay, anyway. So it's intention. All right. Because sometimes I get stuck with these things.
Yeah, and I'm sure every Muslim's can have their own answer to this, or if they can point to the text and then tell us what the text says and why you believe that's the case. If nobody gets punished, then somebody must be responsible for the guy not being convinced. Either it's God, either it's the people who are doing dawah, or it's the guy himself. There's no other options. So who's responsible for the guy not accepting this?
Yeah,
I know where I tend to lean towards, but
it's the blame.
I have no way of knowing that.
Now, how could you know though? What's the only way you could possibly know?
Okay, listen to the question. What's the only way you could possibly know? There's not only one way you could possibly know. What's the best way you could know would be a personal revelation, presumably, that is verifiable outside of yourself. Ideally in some scientific way where you have instruments that can pick this up, can record this. You have other people that are eyewitness to this. So it's eyewitness plus recordings of some kind. Something like that would probably be, I can't think of a better way than that. That's a personal revelation, but it's not the only way. I would say that's probably the best way. But are there other ways? Probably. But he's saying what's the only way? It's very limited.
Typical Hamza question, I would call that. Unthinking and like really superficial.
Yeah.
I guess being spoken to by him directly?
Not necessarily you being spoken to, but the only way...
Yes, no, it's not the only way.
That would be one of them, exactly.
Anybody can know about the Creator and the purpose and all of these things is through revelation, is through this Creator revealing about himself, his nature, purpose.
But isn't that what he said? Speak to him. No. By himself. It's like the default out of his mouth is no. Right? It's just like somebody burping or somebody... Whatever we all have default responses. His default response for everything is no. And then saying exactly what the guy said in different words. The guy said, speaking to me. Is that not revelation? Yes, it is. His response, no. But let me say it in this way. It's exactly what the guy said in different words.
Yeah, but this shows how narrow he is. If you don't use exactly the word that he expects, it's no, no, no. It's only when you use the real word, then he will agree with you.
But also, he's got this dominating personality, right? So this guy's obviously a much more relaxed sort of guy. I would be saying to, but that's exactly what I said. The intention of what I said is he revealed himself to me. He spoke to me. Is that not revelation? Why did you say no, 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 and then say exactly what I meant in different words? It's what you said is synonymous with what I said, and yet you said no, no, no. Why do you say that? Is that just like a default response when you wake up in the morning? No, no, no. Something happens, right? Anything you say is just, it's like programmed in your brain because you've been arguing with people all the time. Your default response is they cannot possibly actually say something correct. So it's no, 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 even when I say the same thing as they do in slightly different words.
Can you see the
Little
screen?
man.
No, I can't see anything. I'm just looking at the video at the moment.
Okay, this is great. Hamza is now a verb. And to Hamza is to get confused by your own words.
Yeah, I just think whatever somebody says, as you say, stops. It's a case of, well, they haven't said exactly the words that I was going to say in my mind. I've got my script ready in my mind. It's like pre-programmed to fire out in a moment. And if you say something that doesn't match that, I'm just going to say no, no, no by default. I'm not going to think about what you're saying. Go, okay, yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, he might have said, oh, well, yeah, that's pretty much it. Although I'd probably use the word revelation, but I'm sure that's synonymous with what you meant when God speaks to you, because that is revealing himself to you, isn't it? Anyway.
And all of these things. Do you not agree?
Yeah, I would agree, but also there's different contradicting revelations. Like
No,
someone will say it's a revelation.
We can deal with that. It's no problem. But the point here is that
If I can make one point very quickly. So Dream, the issue really, the first thing here is that having multiple concepts of a creator.
Yep.
So people often put this thing where they say they're an atheist, and then they say, look, there's lots of different gods. So you're an atheist, and you don't believe in all of the other gods apart from your particular god. And this is sort of a little bit of a straw man in the sense that all of the people who belong to these different religions, they all have one thing in agreement, that there is a God.
Yeah.
Now, so the idea that there is a God for human beings is an overwhelming reality in the sense that they all accept, on the whole, apart from a small but significant proportion that don't, the vast majority have throughout the history of mankind accepted that there is a creator. And when it comes to working out what the creator is, there's certain things that you could just automatically eliminate. So, for example, if someone is worshipping like a tree, you could, from your own self, you can say, actually, well, I don't think that's right.
But on what basis?
So you think God's a tree?
No.
Okay, that was a great question. On what basis could you rule out that God's a tree? In the sense that, you could go into more nuance and say he's coming as a tree, right? The Christians suggest that he came as fire, or, well, it's not fire, but he was fire in a bush, the burning bush type of thing, and say that's God. I'm not going to say because the question is quite good in the sense that is it logically possible that he could appear as a tree? Right? That might be slightly better phrased. But his question was great. Well, how do you rule that out? But notice what he says here. He doesn't answer the question. His response is, do you think he is a tree? And again, if I'm Dream, and we all learn from this, right? I don't know how many times he's done it, but just repeat the question. Hang on a moment, but I asked you, what's the criteria to rule out that he could be a tree? And asking me, do I think he's a tree, is not a response to the question that I asked you. This is what we've got to be better at with these sort of guys. Don't answer their questions if you don't hear a clear answer to yours.
Do you think it's helpful?
I'm not saying.
Sorry. Do you think it's helpful to go and premise this with, I think you've misunderstood, or I think you got it wrong, or try and listen again carefully to what I'm saying because you're not getting it? Are these kind of remarks helpful to go and focus somebody, or is that?
Yeah, I think it could be. I think it could be. I could say, hang on a moment. I did ask you a question there. Let me ask that again, because maybe it got lost in translation, or however you want to put that. Ideally, you don't want to get their back up. I mean, sometimes that'll happen anyway. Sometimes you want to get their back up. But like you say, hang on a moment. I did ask you a question there, and I'm hearing you ask me a question as, whether I believe that. Let me just say that isn't an answer to the question that I asked you, which is, on what basis do you rule out God being a tree? And now they have to provide an argument, right? This is what these guys are not very good at, is providing arguments. And they're so used to being able to just ignore it and ask a question and people respond to them, that possibly, I don't think they've got good arguments anyway, but they're not very good at presenting because they're not pushed enough to do it more often. Okay, but I don't use my standard phrase, which is, I think you're lacking comprehension skills. Let me try that again. I mean, you could do. It depends on, whether you're frustrated, how far you go with, how well you know these people, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, you could do, or you could say it slightly more nicely. I think there's something got missed here, and and then just re-ask the question again.
Okay,
Can you
right,
respond?
okay.
Or you could just say, can you respond to the question I asked you? Right, but
Did you
because he just dodged
understand
that
my question?
entirely now.
Can you repeat my question back to me so that I can see whether you understood it?
Well, at this stage,
Do
I mean,
you,
you
do you
could but
remember
I think that-
Imran was talking down at me, and I said to him, well, he was trying to ask me the same question 3 or 4 times because he didn't understand my answer. So I went to him and I said, listen, let me read back your question to you, and then tell me whether this is your question. And I read it back to him, and he was so surprised that I actually was able to rephrasing it, of course, his question. And then he realized, oh my God, this guy has understood my question, but I have not understood the answer. Because he was so surprised when I gave him back the question that he was asking. But this is also a tactic that you can use to shorten these cumbersome discussions when they keep on asking you the same question, to take control and say, listen, let me tell you what I understood, and then you can answer it, or then you can ask them again. So these are ways to shorten it. And I remember his face. I mean, it was
summary or steelman their position or their question
exactly.
in a shorter, more powerful and more impactful way than they did. But here he just dodged the question, and we shouldn't be allowing questions to be dodged like that unless they're happy for us to dodge questions as well.
And always pay them compliments. Always call them clueless and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, that might not help. Depends how far down the line you are.
No,
I mean, I'm not against doing that. I've done that on occasions. I try not to, but it'll happen to me, and I might do it on a review like this. But then there'll be good reason, I think, for me to do it. I just don't do it out of the gate. But at a certain point where it's happened over and over and over again, I am going to suggest that it's clueless. And then if somebody says to me why, it can't be an ad hominem, because I'll go, hang on a moment, here's the reason why that's the case, because there are no clues here that can be followed in a logical, and here's the evidence of that.
I believe that. I'm saying, but like, based on what? How do you know for sure that it's not true?
There we go. Great. Right. So he just asked the question again. Right. He ignored his question and he asked the question again. How do you know it's not true?
So do you believe that God is a tree?
No, I don't.
Okay, why don't
he shouldn't have answered the question. Exactly. He should have re-asked the question again, right? Because now Imran just dodged the question the second time. And this is where you do have to be firm, like Stops and I would do with these guys. So hang on a moment, ask, are you not prepared to answer that question? How do you establish that God is not a tree? That's the question he asked initially, right?
Why don't you believe that God is a tree?
So I don't have a reason to believe that he is, but also I have sorry?
You believe that God could be a tree?
I don't see why not. I think God could do what he wants. Or be what he
wants. Why do you believe that? Yeah.
Why do you believe that God can do what he wants? What a ridiculously stupid question. I mean, holy crap. Why do you think he could do that? Because he's God. That's why. I mean, are you not following along here? Sometimes the questions, it's like he's not following right, and just he has to say something, and then you have a ridiculous question. Why would you believe that? Holy crap.
I'd say if he can create the universe, he can do something like be a tree. There's not much. I don't think there's a limit.
Look at the giggle here as well. I mean, the guy really is clueless. The real question, or another way to phrase this is it logically impossible for God to be a tree, since he can create a universe and he's all powerful, or maximally powerful, whatever term you guys want to use? Is there something that prevents him from appearing as a tree or being a tree, or whatever the case may be? What's the logical contradiction is the question to ask these guys. They won't answer it, of course, or very unlikely they will answer, but that's another way to phrase the same thing.
Can I just ask you a quick question?
Yeah.
Notice there nobody answered it, right?
Yeah.
Nobody answered his question.
Totally.
What happens now? Somebody else wants to ask him a question. And this is where you have to hold these guys to account. They're not going to like it. They'll probably kick Stops or I or somebody else that's more ardent off the panel. Although Hamza will do it when it suits him, and so will the other guys attempt to re-ask the questions as Imran did. But you've got to hold them to the standard. Anybody else, hey, Abbas, I'm not going to answer a question now. I asked you guys the question. What's the logical contradiction of God being a tree? If he's all powerful or maximally powerful, what prevents him from being a tree? They might say, oh, well, he can't enter his creation. What's the logical contradiction that suggests he can't do that? Are you saying that he lacks the power to enter his creation? Right? That sort of thing.
Have you actually looked into Islam?
Yeah.
And what do you find about Islam that doesn't convince you?
Oh, dear. Fitra, sound reasoning. We haven't had any reasoning here. All we've had is dodging the questions and asking him questions back instead.
Well, my original concern that I was here for is one of those things.
Okay, so do you believe that you accepting a particular punishment from God is the basis of whether that God exists or does not exist? Do you think that's a reasonable
What?
argument to make?
No, not alone, no.
So then that argument falls flat then, doesn't it?
I'm not here.
Okay, Abbas didn't understand the concern he came with. He came with a concern that if dawah was given and somebody wasn't convinced, they would be destined for hell, as opposed to them not having dawah and maybe being judged on their works or their good actions or whatever the case was. As I understood it, that's kind of his original point. So he also didn't understand or follow. And look, Dream could have explained it better as well. He could have elaborated that slightly better. I think hopefully...
No, that's not where I'm going, yeah.
Go on.
No, that's not, he could have said, that's not where I'm going.
Yeah.
I'm not here making an argument against that. I'm seeking
No, but
clarification.
my point to you, Dream, is this, is that, you see, if God has decided on a particular matter, that if you do this, this will be the punishment.
Yeah.
Now, you're concerned that that punishment might apply to you. So the logical thing to do would then be to find out whether that God actually exists and whether that God actually said that.
Yeah.
Not putting the cart before the horse and saying, well, actually, that punishment seems rather harsh. I don't think I can accept that.
That's not what he's doing. He's looking into Islam and going, hey, in a sense, he's not using these words, but he's doing an internal critique. Hey, if your God existed and this was the consequence of what happening and you guys doing dawah, etc., and I wasn't convinced, I go to hell. Whether your God exists in actual reality or not, he's going, well, if he existed, this is a concern I have. How do you guys respond to this? And maybe you can allay my concern about this. Irrespective, that might actually help me believe that he does exist, but it's a question I have about an internal critique of your worldview.
And the consistency.
That's a very illogical way of looking at it. Because once you've analyzed the fact that I believe a God exists, and I believe that this God seems to have sent this revelation, let me test these revelations. And that if I do find something that is on balance of probability, and I use that word very, very carefully because that is the term that we all apply to all information out there, whether we accept it or we don't. It's always balance of probability.
Yeah.
On a reasonable balance of probability, if we are convinced that this is a message from God, and now that God tells you, yes, buddy, you better be careful, because if you don't accept me, once you've accepted that I exist and that this is from God, i.e. the Quran, you're in big trouble. And so,
of course,
hang on, he's presupposed everything. What is the point? Because you first have to accept that the God exists, then you have to accept that there is revelation, then you have to accept this, and only then can you go and ask questions. This is silly. You need to do it the other way around.
Yeah, I mean, there's different ways to do it. I often do the internal critique, and I go, okay, suppose your God exists, suppose he's most merciful, or all merciful, because you'll hear later Hamza's thinking there's a difference between most merciful and all merciful. I'm not convinced there is. I think they're synonymous. But let's suggest that he's most merciful. Is that what we would expect of a most merciful God? Hey, do what I say or else there's going to be trouble. And if you're not convinced because the information that has been relayed to you has not been convincing, then presumably this most merciful God will take that into account, or should take that into account, or we would expect this God to take it into account. Because if God himself came down and convinced you or did his best, then, that would probably be the best thing that can happen. But because you've got these terribly flawed dawah people trying to do it, either they're responsible, or the guy is responsible, or God is responsible. Or if God is not going to take any responsibility or give any responsibility, at least then the merciful thing to do is to go, okay, well, you just didn't get the best information from the best people. I could have done it, but I chose not to do that for whatever reason, although I would hold him accountable for that. So then at least he would supposedly be merciful. But clearly that's not the case.
And the other thing is, if I tell somebody, listen, you can't fly, that is not a question of probability. That information is a fact. and not a probability. So I think he's being a little bit too easy on himself here, saying categorically that this everything is just a matter of probability. I don't agree with that.
Yeah, I think you're right. You'd have to ask them, what do you mean by probability? Are you talking about like epistemic certainty of knowing X, Y, and Z? I mean, could it be the case that you could fly, if you had, and because I looked into this for once just for the hell of it, I went, okay, because obviously people try to make stuff up, right? How does Superman fly? And there are actual quote unquote scientific theories on how it could be logically possible. Not that it's practically possible. I kid you not, right? And one of the ways that people try to suggest this is that he has a personal aura that he's able to control the space around him, i.e., that he can do whatever he does, right? Now, if it's logically possible, then something like that could be the case. I mean, maybe science, I don't know, I'm not an expert. If science says no, that is impossible, then of course you'd have to find another thing. But here's a scenario that's been dreamt up about how Superman can fly and control the direction he moves and the speed and change direction, all the rest of it, when as far as we can tell with physics, that's not possible from our understanding. But if somebody had some sort of personal aura that they could control it, around them, then maybe that's possible, right? So that's how people try to suggest it, how Superman could fly. Because I was like, there's nothing in our understanding that allow, even if a human could levitate, how is it that they could change direction and accelerate and do all the rest of the things that Superman does? The inquiring mind asked the question. So I looked it up, and that was one. This was one, what's the word? Hypothesis, to put it mildly, that somebody put out there.
I would then suggest to you that on that basis, you should think, well, maybe it would be sensible then to accept this God and accept Islam. That's logical. That's reasonable.
Yeah,
that's
and
circular.
What people do, you see.
Yeah, but they've got a script, right? You need to first believe that a God exists, then you need to believe that that's Allah, or that there are some revelations and it's Allah, right? They have a script that goes down there. But like I said, you've said it the same thing, right? If they demonstrated the Quran was correct, they wouldn't need step one. But in this case, he's going, the reason why I'm not convinced of I believe in a God, right? So he's already passed that step. He's already said that. But one of the reasons he's not convinced is because of this problem he had. Either a logical. I mean, I'd have to think about it. But here's a concern that he has, either moral or logical, within the framework. How do you guys explain this that might set my mind at ease? Not that I'm going to hell, but that if this and this happened, and I'm not convinced I might go to hell, how do you guys reconcile this? And what's your answer to this? That's what he's really asking. So it seems like none of them have understood it. And even if they did, I'm not sure if they could even have a good answer to it.
You see, Dream, is that they get stuck in the minutiae, the details, which are, to the best of our ability, subjective in our understanding. Because what you're arguing today, 200 years ago, you might not have it argued. It may have been very reasonable to you. But our culture today, our nurture, our nature, all of these things play and influence us heavily on our judgment on things. And so we can't necessarily solely trust those judgments to be absolutes. But you see, what you're doing is you're trusting your own judgment to be somehow an absolute, a switch, an on and off switch. If this doesn't add up, it can't be from God. But you're using your subjective reasoning to.
Okay, what a trivially obvious statement. Everybody's using their subjective reasoning to see whether something is convincing. And as Dream suggested, you can't choose to be convinced. You are either convinced for reasons, good reasons, or bad. It's not like, and the example, like I said, is very simple. Try to convince yourself that Santa Claus exists. You'll be delusional, right? You would be lying to yourself. But if somebody presented evidence, or if you spoke to a young child, they would be convinced of this for bad reasons, but they would genuinely be convinced. You can't choose to be convinced that Santa exists. That's the point. So all of this long ramble here is just missing the point entirely. And I would be asking when this guy's finished rambling, okay, I appreciate you said that. That didn't address my question. I'm going to repeat the question. Abbas, now you can single him out, right? Because he decided he'd jump in. Here's the question. What's your response to this, please? That's another way to do it. Because this is just a rambling response that doesn't in any way address the original question that Dream put out there.
To come to that. And what I would argue to you is use more objective reasoning, which is that if you do believe that this God exists, find out whether this God has made an attempt to communicate with you, Dream, and apply the test. And the Quran says, had this book come from anyone other than your Lord, you would have surely found in it many contradictions, many.
But this is exactly what he's doing. He is coming to you and asking exactly this question, and you are telling, well, what you need to do is go and ask this question. And this is exactly what he's saying. How do I know? How do I find out? What is it? And you're saying, well, all you need to do is do this silly test. I don't know why.
Yeah, go and read the Quran and try and find some contradictions in there, right? You and I have found those. They don't accept it. So the response is, I'm not going to answer the question directly, but go and read this book. And, if you find something, then come back to us. And, of course, we'll give you some canned response that we're used to giving. That wouldn't work with Stops and I and other people, but other people, they might sort of give up after a while. Who knows?
I'd love to ask this, Abaska. Can you give me one example of objective reasoning? Just give me one example, just to see whether you understand what you're talking about.
Yeah. What's the difference between subjective and objective reasoning? Since you use the terms, Abbas, do you actually know the difference? Articulate what the difference is.
No, give me an example. Just use it.
I think what he's trying to get to is, hey, here's something, because remember, they're coming from their paradigm that it's objectively true that God exists. So presumably what he's trying to say is, well, that's objective reasoning. Any other reasoning is subjective reasoning, which of course is begging the question against every other worldview, because they could say exactly the same. Anybody that doesn't believe Christianity or Buddhism, you got everybody else, that's objective reasoning. You guys are doing subjective reasoning. But again, it's good to ask them the question. It's just rambling stuff anyway. It's not addressing the point that Dream is making.
But he's saying use objective reasoning, and he says, well, you need to first accept the creator, then you can start asking the questions. That's the opposite of objective reasoning.
And so look at the claims. Now, I don't know if you were listening to the stream earlier, Dream.
Yeah.
When Imran alluded to these fluids, the Quran is filled with such information, and it's inconceivable and improbable that in the 7th century a man is able to make these claims where that information had not arrived in that form for over 1,000, 12, 1,300 years after, that it could have come from anyone other than deductively. When you use deductive reasoning, when you apply all the probabilities of where it could have come from, really you can only be convinced about one thing, that it has come from something far higher than any human capacity or knowledge or understanding for over 1,000, 12, 13, and even 1,400 years. And so
I'd love to ask Abbas a question at this point. Abbas, how do you rule out that it's advanced aliens that did this as a test of human credulity, and for how long, some humans like yourself would use be credulous towards this sort of thing? So this is an alien experiment that know our DNA and our thinking and so forth, and they want to see how long this is. This is all a test from advanced aliens. How do you establish that's not the case? Anything he's going to say, I'm going to say, but the aliens have constructed that. They can manipulate time and matter to act like a god, to show you, but there are clues there. Abbas, there are clues within the system that people, at least some of us that are critically thinking, have noticed. How do you establish that it's not an advanced alien race that is using humans as an experiment to see how long they believe mythical stories? See what his answer is, if he even has a coherent answer. I'd like to start with a coherent answer. I'm not expecting a substantial one, but I'd like to hear a coherent response to that. That would be a start.
And so once you're convinced about that, it's time to say the Shahada. It's time to accept Islam. And then you don't have to worry about hellfire.
Don't worry. This is just the beginning. This is the beginning of the preaching. This is the beginning. We're only at 208. Believe me, it's going to happen for a long time still.
Inshallah. Be a good person, live by those good morals, those good standards, be kind to your neighbor, be charitable, be just, be fair, be honorable. And above all, the Quran says, we created the spirits and the human beings and the spirits, the jinn and the ins, the spirits and the human beings, for no other reason but to worship me. So start worshiping that creator.
I think...
Hey, Abbas, do me a favor, stop preaching. Can you answer my question? Because your preaching is falling on deaf ears. I'm not convinced of your religion, and I've presented you a concern that I have. You haven't answered it, and you've given me preaching. Do you think you're doing good dawah at this moment in time?
I think I might have miscommunicated. So I'm not saying that this is an argument against, just proving it false. I'm more trying to seek clarification on it, because I say the vast majority of the world is not Muslim. So, does that mean the vast majority of the world is,
Yeah, but the quarter of the world is Muslim.
No, I think, Dream, your point...
Can you believe it? I mean,
when I heard this, it's like another one of those sort of kind of slap in the face idiotic responses. But a quarter of the world is. Okay, so he's doing an ad populum. What Hamza's response is the opposite of an ad populum, an ad minimum or something type of thing. Well, there's a small amount of people that believe it. What a ridiculously stupid thing to say. Obviously, an ad populum is an informal fallacy. Just because a lot of people don't believe it doesn't make it false. But his response is, well, some people believe it, i.e. a quarter of the population. Does that make it true? Obviously
That makes
not.
it worse. It makes it worse.
Yeah, exactly. If you were going by the number of people, then by that logic, you're definitely your religion is false. All you had to point out was that he's appealing to a lot of people. That might have been a valid response, but your response is, well, a quarter of the world's population believe it. What a ridiculously stupid response to have.
And I'd love to ask him, why do you believe that?
Oh, well, then he's going to go into the Quran and all the rest of it, right?
No, why do you believe that a quarter of mankind does this? Because this is also a topic that they don't understand. This is just wishful thinking.
Well, they'll cite polls and all the stuff that say there's 1.7 billion Muslims or whatever. Yeah.
And they're all wrong. This is the
point
problem.
here is, you see, Dream, Allah is just. So when somebody does not receive the message of Islam, there is a different test and a different trial for them. When somebody dies in isolation somewhere where they haven't heard about Islam, there is a different assessment for them. When somebody hears Islam from a terrorist, for example, and decides not to accept Islam, because all they see, perhaps in their country, in their area, in their town, are negative propaganda, and they perhaps haven't had the opportunity because there wasn't internet or there wasn't information easily available out there, and that because of that, as a consequence, they did not accept Islam. There would be a different trial and a different test, and they would be judged accordingly. But
just wait a second. Doesn't he realize he is just showing how impossible the existence of his God is? That his God is dependent on the internet. That his God is dependent.
No, I don't think he's saying that, though, Stops.
What he's communication, saying is he says people are isolated. There can be people isolated who have never heard of Islam. He is saying that it's all down to interhuman communication in the form of other things. He is saying that his God is incapable of reaching out to individual human beings regardless of how isolated they are, which is something that I would definitely expect within the portfolio of a God. And he is saying, no, this God can't do it. If you're isolated, if you don't hear from a messenger, tough shit, you don't get it, you don't get punished, but you will never get into the proper heaven.
Okay, but I thought I heard something different. He wasn't talking about the God specifically. He was talking about different punishments if you hadn't heard the message, number one, or you'd heard it, quote unquote, by his lights from the wrong source, in inverted commas. Then there's a different judgment. But the question I'd have is, okay, and the question I'd be asking is, okay, what happens, because this was Dream's question, what happens if I come on this panel, I ask you guys questions, right? I've never heard of it, but I come on, I hear you guys speaking, I go, oh, I've not heard about this before. Let me ask you. I come away unconvinced because you guys aren't good at, presenting this thing in a logical, coherent, and substantial way. That was my question
from earlier, yeah.
What happens then? Is it better that I'd never heard from you guys, and then God would judge me on my deeds, or he could ask me questions, etc., on the day of resurrection if there was such a day? In other words, is the punishment less if I don't speak to you guys? And if that is the case, then me speaking to you guys, I'm taking a massive risk here, because you guys could actually turn me off it, and the punishment might be worse having spoken to you guys than not having spoken to you at all.
Yeah, but the thing is, what he was saying is, what happens to a person who has never heard about it?
Yeah. And he's saying there's a different. Abbas is saying there's a different punishment, or there's a different, whatever's going on there, whatever that different thing is. The question is it a better or a worse version? Because you can say they're different.
Stop at the question. Stop at the question. Don't give an answer. The question is, what happens to a guy who is isolated, who never hears about Islam?
He said so. He said there'll be a different. He said there'll be a different punishment.
Why are you answering? I'm saying, why are you answering? Stop at the question. This is what I'm doing. I'm stopping at the question. The question itself demonstrates that this God doesn't exist. Because how can you be isolated from a God? That's impossible. Because this God created you.
No, but
how can you be isolated?
Yeah, but what he means by isolated is you're not knowing about this particular God.
I know that, Rob. I understand all that.
How does that demonstrate? Okay, I'm not following. Maybe it's me. It's late. How does that demonstrate that God doesn't exist? Because you don't know about it.
Because a God is depending on interhuman communication. He is incapable of creating a human being, knowing during the creation process that that person is going to be isolated and will never hear about the message, is unable to send a messenger, where the Quran says you cannot be punished without ever having received a messenger, and he is incapable of sending the message to that guy unless it is through interhuman communication. So this invalidates the Almighty God, who creates human beings who cannot get the message across to them.
Yeah, I think they would say that, like you just said, right? If you don't get a punishment for not hearing about him, maybe that's God's plan with certain people. That doesn't mean that God doesn't exist or that he's not powerful. He's made a choice for certain people not to get the message so that he can judge them, or that they won't get a punishment, or he can judge them differently, or whatever the case is. But that doesn't mean he doesn't exist or that he's not powerful. It's just that he's made the choice for them not to get the message in that way.
Go and read Quran 1:1. What is it? An all-merciful, most merciful God. That doesn't work. If you are creating people to go to hell to punish them for eternity, you are not any kind of a merciful God. No degree
Okay,
of
yeah,
mercy.
that's yeah, but that might be slightly different. Are you saying that, just so I'm clear, are you saying that anybody who doesn't hear the word of, like Allah, for example, in this case, is going to hell?
No.
Okay. So I think that's what they're
saying that the
referring
God
to.
is incompetent. A God like this, who is incapable of creating a human being, knowing that they will be isolated and not getting the message to them, not giving them a chance of responding, is a cruel, incompetent God.
Well, that would only be I think that would be the case if he wasn't merciful in the afterlife, in the day of judgment, right? So if these people never heard about the God, again, we have to, what does Islam say on this? But if it were the case that somebody never heard about it, but you had a merciful God on the day of judgment and said, okay, you didn't hear about it, I'm revealing to you now, what do you say now? And the person then had a chance to do so, I'm guessing we would say, well, okay, he's merciful in that sense. If he said, well, you never got the message, I'm not going to give you the message, I'm not going to allow you to, you're going straight to hell, then we would say he's not merciful. But just because they didn't hear about it, if they're given a, quote, fair chance on the day of resurrection, would he be merciful then?
I just remembered something. This is exactly what happens. If you do not hear about it, you are told at the pearly gates about this, and then you have a chance to decide at the gate, and then it's a flip of the coin. Either you say yes, then you go in, or you say no, then you're down into hell. So it's a split-second decision that you need to take if you have never heard about it.
Okay, well, I think then we wouldn't be merciful, right? You need time to think about it, or unless what they mean by a split second is an age amount of time, or your brain can operate at like super speed or something, because you can't make that sort of world-altering decision like instantaneously. And certainly not people who think critically about these things. I'm not the best, but whoever the fastest or most critically thinking human ever is, to make a split-second decision, unless you've got all the information you've had time prior, I would agree that would be unmerciful.
Well, that's the thing that you get. This is the sequence. Anyway, this was just something that crossed my mind now, that what Abbas is doing, he's actually demonstrating that the way this God is set up cannot possibly work if what he is saying is true.
But we believe, and Allah says,
can you believe we've got Boma in the chat, or somebody who's taking the name anyway. Oh my God, the audacity. I wonder when I'm going to get the book that he promised me, I don't know how many years ago. He still hasn't sent it.
Well, maybe he'll learn something from this. Maybe he'll learn something about how his fellow Muslims behave, and maybe he can be better at doing dawah. We'll see if he takes anything we're saying on board and notices it, if he's open to hearing how his fellow Muslims are not very good at this.
That on the day of judgment, that you will be trialed, you will be judged with absolute fairness and justice. Allah is not looking to throw people into the hellfire. In fact, we have many hadith, many sayings of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, where Allah wants to place people into Jannah and take them out of the hellfire, and out of the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is why we have the Quran. This is why we have the prophets.
So why doesn't he do it?
That I definitely don't agree with, right? If he's going to judge you, here's the thing. If it were the case that you never heard about it and you got the opportunity to be judged on Judgment Day, and you had the chance to be convinced by Allah directly, I would take that over any dawah person every single day of every day that's ever been on earth. No dawah person could ever convince me better than God could. So if the choice was, I don't want to know about it in this world, but I'd rather get the chance in the afterlife speaking to God or his direct representative better than any human would, I'm going to take that chance every single day. And I'm going to say, I don't ever want to hear about Islam. And in fact, if that were the case, you guys should not be doing dawah, because anybody that's not convinced, the blame now does lie with you, because in actual fact, that you should keep your mouth quiet and say, hang on a moment, but God would be better at giving them the opportunity to do so than I ever could. So I shouldn't be presenting dawah to them, because I might actually turn them off. They might be unconvinced because of my poor ability, but if they were unconvinced from God's point of view, then fair enough, he can judge them if that's what they believe judgment's all about. So they really shouldn't be doing dawah if that were the case.
And if you're better off not knowing than knowing the wrong thing, then you should keep quiet.
Correct.
Anyway.
Yes, because you're going to get a better opportunity to hear it from Allah directly, and then be able to consider and then you can ask all of these questions and get the best possible, in fact, the knockdown response, the perfect response to any question you have, that I and you and any other person would be intellectually satisfied, and we could not actually respond with anything else. We go, do you know what, Allah, you have answered every single thing in such a way that I am speechless. I accept this. But with these guys, that chance is virtually non-existent. So in actual fact, these guys are damning me to hell the more dawah they do, and anybody else that's not convinced, like Dream. In fact, Dream shouldn't be listening to them, and they should be saying, let's not tell anybody about this, let Allah judge them, because then they've got the best opportunity to in fact believe that this is the case, because we are flawed human beings. I want to hear what a Muslim has to say about this. Next, let's remind ourselves about the stops. The next time a Muslim comes on, let's present this to them and see what they say. How do they get out of it?
Catch 22 in the chat. Can you send something useful or only personal insults?
Okay, listen to the question again. Catch 22, Kenny Boma, anybody else. If it's the case that people who have never heard about Islam get judged on the Day of Judgment, presumably that information is going to be revealed to them by Allah or his representative, and not flawed human beings. In other words, they're going to get the best possible opportunity to hear the message, to ask questions, to do whatever it is, to make the most informed decision possible. If you agree that's the case, then you should never be doing dawah, because you could be turning people off, and you would be responsible for sending them to hell, because you are a flawed human being, and you cannot present dawah anywhere near as good as God or his representative. How do you answer this?
This is why Allah inspires some people to pass the message on to you, so that perhaps you may be humble and objective and use your reasoning, and perhaps come to a stage where so many people are coming to this stage, alhamdulillah, around the world, that you end up accepting Islam. It's not a black and white issue, brother, and you're looking at it as a very black and white, that God somehow, you don't accept Islam, bang, hell forever. You've accepted Islam, heaven forever. It doesn't work like that.
Oh, really?
Can I just offer some advice to you, Dream, as well? Do you know what you need to believe to be a Muslim?
One God and the Prophet.
Can I offer you some advice? Let me ask you a question. Yeah.
Good.
Not just one God, that God is the only one worthy of worship. Do you accept that?
Yeah.
Alhamdulillah. So you're halfway to being a Muslim. That's fantastic. Okay. And so the next part is just to believe Muhammad is who he claimed to be. So, because here's the thing, you see, and I think this is something you're going to have to swallow, to be honest with you. Once you believe Muhammad is who he claimed to be, then if the Quran talks about hellfire, then the Quran talks about hellfire. It doesn't really matter. It's irrelevant. It's the truth. It's the reality.
Can we see again that he's absolutely not understood Dream's concern? From the get-go, it's not this. I'm going to run my script here. Okay. And
just
again,
join and everything will be okay.
Yeah, but if I ever got a chance to speak to Dream, I'd say, okay, let's see if we can articulate this question much more clearly, and you just keep asking the question, because at no point have any of these guys answered your question. They've gone at it as if you are not sure whether Islam is true, and now they're trying to convince you of Islam is true, and that was not your original question. Again, for the audience who are new, who haven't heard this, your original question was, what happens if I hear this and I am not convinced? Am I going to go to hell? As opposed to, if I never heard this, he didn't use those words, but the implication is, well, if I didn't hear this, what would happen? And Abbas was saying, hey, there's a different, and he actually said it himself, right? If we rewind the tape here, he himself said, well, there's no punishment for you. You get judged on the Day of Judgment if you've never heard about Islam. And if that's the case, you're better off waiting till the day of judgment so that you can get the best possible information and ask the questions, presumably from God or his direct representative, than from flawed human beings like the EFDawah group. And they've not answered this at all.
Yeah, you're right.
Whether you like that reality is another story. Yeah. And you can question that, and then you can have the discussion, and then you can have the discussion that Abbas decide with you. You know what I mean? So
Yeah, I got what you mean.
So because you came on, you were concerned about hellfire, which is fantastic, which is a brilliant start. And so what you say, so if this fire exists, you don't want to go near it. Agreed?
Yeah, and my thing is that, you guys will be telling me that the way to avoid the hellfire is this way, and then I'll ask someone else. They'll tell me, oh no, actually you got to believe in Jesus. Oh, you got to believe this.
Yeah, but okay. So let's say that happens.
Yeah.
So we're saying to you to save from the hellfire, you should look towards embracing and accepting Islam as your way of life. Yeah, that's what we're saying.
Yeah.
And we'll tell you why. And we're saying Muhammad is claimed to be a messenger of God, and here's why we believe that thing. That's fine. Okay. A Christian will come to you and say, no, don't listen to those crazy Muslims. No, man, they're deceived. They're deceived by the devil. No. Just believe Jesus died for your sins. And here's the golden ticket to Willy Wonka's chocolate factory. Job done. Yeah?
Yeah.
You as an intelligent man should say, why should I believe you? And then they'll try to explain to you, well, Jesus died for your sins. And then you just say to them, why do you believe that? Oh, because it's in the Bible. And you ask them, why do you believe the Bible? Oh, because the Bible's the word of God. Why do you believe that? Oh, because... You understand? And what happens, you see, with the Christianity, you can watch our streams. And it's stripped away. If you look at religions completely and properly and where you're looking at them, you're going to be reduced to three. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam are the ones that make sense. Everything else is kind of like,
Oh boy.
Yeah, let's ignore the default option, which is not believing any of them to be the case. Either one is true or they're all false. Those
And
seem to me
you've
to
got
be the only
200
options,
gods
because if-
active alone today. Come on, please.
Islam has got nothing to do with God. Hinduism has got all sorts of flexes going on. There's all sorts of racism involved in it, and there's all sorts of things. For me, Sikhism is a kind of combination of Islam and Hinduism to try and split the people. This is what it looks like from the outsider. I could be well wrong about that. But the ones that make sense is...
So the ones that make sense are the ones that you haven't actually studied, but from your position, they don't make a lot of sense. Well, how well have you studied it? You just said it yourself. You don't really know. Well, how did you come to the conclusion Islam is the correct one if these other ones you don't really know, but they don't make sense on your superficial understanding? So you haven't actually investigated them closely, and you've cherry-picked Islam for whatever reason. Well, go and do all the rest of them. But don't do a superficial thing of your poor understanding. I mean, you have poor understanding of Islam, Christianity, atheism. So imagine something like Buddhism or Hinduism that you haven't even looked into at all. You're going to have an even worse understanding, and then you're just going to dismiss them out of ignorance. And it's not an intellectual way to go about it.
By the way, there's also no answer from the Muslims in the chat.
Well, yeah.
I don't know if you
Well,
expected
I'm
one,
going to
but-
genuinely inquire, right? Maybe there is an answer. I'm not saying that's a knockdown question. It's not a knockdown argument. What I want to know is, how do they respond to this? And that's I'm genuinely interested as to hear what they're going to say, because I'm not sure how or what they would say on that regard. Some questions I know what they're going to say and I know how to deal with it. But this question, I'd like to know, how do they respond to this? I think I have asked it once or twice, but I might not have asked it as clearly as I'm thinking about it now, and I don't remember any sort of response to it. So, but I'm definitely going to try and keep it in my mind to ask Muslims again.
sense is that there's a creator, and he's one, and he sent messengers and guides to guide the people, and he gave those messengers miracles to prove who they claim to be. Now, here's the thing, you see, Dream. You're saying Christians could come to you and say, yeah, Dream, yeah, you should believe Jesus came as a messenger and such, yeah? Okay. Did Jesus come for you? So if they bring Jesus to the table, did Jesus come for you?
They'll tell me that he did, yeah.
No, all right. So, no, this is not a subjective thing now. This is an objective thing now.
Yeah.
Did Jesus say he came for you? No. If you want to, the books of the Christians tells you clearly Jesus came for the children of Israel. And he demonstrates it through his actions, through his preaching, yeah? And what he teaches the disciples, go ye not to the Gentile, into so Jesus has only came for the children of Israel, according to the scripture that they follow.
Okay.
Yeah? Okay. There's only one man in history, who claimed to be a messenger to the whole world. Only one. Allah says in the Quran.
How do you know that? Have you studied every other religion and every other human that's ever made some claims of, accepting a God and that God coming for all people? No, quite clearly you haven't. So this is a statement out of ignorance, but you do this with absolute certainty as if you've studied this and you're a scholar and you know that there's no other human being that has possibly made this claim. It's remarkable.
Quran, we sent Muhammad as a mercy to mankind. And Muhammad demonstrated this by sending a message to Persia to him.
How exactly is Muhammad a mercy for mankind? What about all the slaves? What about all the women he raped? What about all the women he killed? What about me? How is Muhammad useful for me today? How? Give me something that is useful. I don't need somebody telling me that it's okay for me to rape women and enjoy it to the hilt. I don't need that kind of advice. So how is this Muhammad guy, how is he useful for me? He's not.
Yeah, good question to ask Muslims, right, by today's standards, right? Because they might cherry pick something, and Hamza might say something like, oh, well, the Quran that says you shouldn't drink. Do you agree that drinking is bad, whatever, right? So he might cherry pick something, but you can respond with something like you said, right, and go, well, hang on a moment. He did X, Y, and Z, right? So why are you cherry picking those things and ignoring something else? So it's a good question. Maybe you should ask Muslims. That if there's Muslims in the chat, ask them there as well. Type it out, or if your hearing stops his voice.
You don't
What advantage is there? How is Muhammad a mercy for humans today? What is it that he brings to the table in the 21st century that if it didn't exist, would make it bad for you? Other than obviously claiming that he's the last messenger and then you're going to go to hell. Is there something else? Because those claims, that's what you can't demonstrate. But is there actually something of moral value that Muhammad brings to the table?
To Rome and to Egypt, calling them to worship the one God, Abraham. And they're the three. That was the world at the time, because they were the three big empires: Roman Empire, the Persian Empire, and when I say Roman, I mean Byzantium, yeah, and the Persians and the Egyptians, yeah. So this was a demonstration of his mission. So the Quran says we sent you as the mercy to mankind, and he delegated messengers to mankind to call them to worship the one God. So where are you from, my friend? If you don't mind me asking.
Canada.
You're in Canada, okay. So if a message is sent to the US of A, is it any of your business?
Well, it might be, depending on whether that message has any influence on Canada, right? It depends what the message is. So I think the correct response, just straightforwardly is, well, it depends if the message has any implications on Canada.
Not really.
No, because the message is not for you. It's for the people of the US of A. And if a message is sent to Sweden, it's none of your business.
Yeah, I know. This is the sort of comment that does, sometimes make me wonder about human critical thinking and cognitive ability.
Oh, and Rob, because Kenny is asking, well, why don't I give him the link? No, you are a pathological liar. You are a really shitty human being. You're a complete asshole. Why would I want you to discuss something with you? You have shown over and over again that you are a really despicable person. So there is no point discussing this with you, okay? Thank you.
I mean, I could have him on, but again, I'm not doing it now, A, because we've got a review, but B, when you said stop spamming the book, at least you would have demonstrated that you're a man of your word. At the moment, you are not a man of your word, and that for me is problematic. So stop spamming the book that you promised a year and a half ago, whatever the case is, and at least then I can consider you having finally fulfilled the promise that you originally made.
The messenger comes and says he sent for the whole world. That's your messenger. So all you need to do is look for that messenger who came for you. There's no point listening to a messenger who's not come for you. What's the point?
Yeah, you're right, but at the same time, it's also how to know he's telling the truth. Because anyone can say whatever they want.
Alhamdulillah. And this is where it comes down to. This is what it comes down to, a claim in the desert. This is what it comes down to. 1400 years ago, Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, made a claim. Then an angel approached him in the cave of Hira and told him he's a messenger to mankind from God. Yeah?
Yeah.
Test the claim. That's all you need to do. It's a very simple process. Either this guy who's making this claim of angels talking to him must be crazy. But you believe in God, yeah?
Yeah.
So you have no problem accepting the existence of angels, yeah?
Yeah, I guess not.
Right. So you're saying, okay, you believe so an angel could have visited him, or he could be crazy. Now, the Christians make the claim that this was a demon pretending to be an angel. So you could look at that claim as well.
Yeah.
Or he's lying. He's just made it all up. He's just come up with this concoction. He's going to be he's going to create this new religion, whether it was through personal gain.
As I've said countless times, and I hear myself repeating it, but one has to, I guess, because they repeat the same script. All you have to say is that he was mistaken. He heard voices. If anybody today came along and said they heard God speaking to them, or an angel speaking to them in a cave today in the 21st century, what's the first thing any of us are going to think? Are we going to think that they actually heard an angel, or are we going to think that they're mistaken and their mind is playing tricks on them? What makes Muhammad any different?
Yeah, there's lots of different options. Or he didn't exist. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's another option, of course.
Altruism. He just wanted to make the society a better place. He came up with this idea, and he concocted this lie that he's a messenger of God. And for 23 years, he passed a charade, should I say, that he's acting like a messenger of God, pretending revelations coming to him and coming up with the Quran. Yeah?
Yeah.
Or he's telling the truth.
That's a possibility.
Right. So when you eliminate the impossible, whatever's left, no matter how improbable, has to be the truth.
Okay, the problem with this is called the Holmes. Problem
That's
with this
silly.
is it's called the Holmesian fallacy, right? It's like Sherlock Holmes, who who's the author of Sherlock Holmes? Oh, it escapes me at the moment. Doyle,
Arthur
right?
Conan Doyle.
Arthur Conan Doyle. Thank you. But this is fallacy. How do you establish that you have ruled out everything else and the only thing left is the only possible thing? How do you do this? If you're not omniscient, how do you do this? Right, so that's why it's called the Holmesian fallacy. When you rule out everything else, whatever's left, no matter how improbable, must be the truth. And the problem is, how do you rule everything else out? And that's why it's rightly called the Holmesian fallacy. Look it up.
Like it, don't like it, it is what it is.
Sure,
yeah?
but how do you know it's impossible that he lied?
Right. So first, you do it one by one. You go, was he crazy? Look at what the Quran is. For example, did you see the stream with Rob where we're talking about embryology and the fetus?
Yeah, that was painful to watch.
Right. So if he was lying, let's go for the lie. If he was lying.
All right, we're going to go through this now. I know it's painful, people. We've heard it all before, but here's the script again. So we'll deal with it as and when.
Where did he get that? Where would he have got this information from? He would have got it from people of the time, yeah?
Yeah, he could have. I mean, it's known that
he could have got the works of the Greeks, from Aristotle, Galen, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. Were Aristotle and Galen correct on embryology?
I'm not qualified to say.
No. One of them believed there was a mini embryo in the semen. The other one believed that the fetus formed from menstrual blood. They were wrong. It was only after the discovery of the electron microscope where they could actually see what was going on in the 19th century, they knew exactly the process, yeah?
Well, that's not the case either, right? And it's very vague what the Quran says. And as we did on the previous part one of this, Imran's interpretation and claims about the Quran don't stack up, right? He's taking cherry-picked views. We've done it in part one. Go back and have a look there. We've gone over this. Hamza's taken it that it's actually the case and that nobody else did it because Imran made certain claims, made certain cherry-pick, and tried to link the two with the vague statements in the Quran. And now Hamza's entirely convinced of this and just parrots back what he's heard before. No, I'm not accepting that. Stops isn't, and anybody go watch part one. You shouldn't accept it too, presumably. And some Muslims don't, right? So at least good on them. They don't accept that either.
I wonder if a Muslim is going to see the video that I put out today and realize, oh shit, we've got a problem here. The thing is that even today, we don't know everything about embryology. Don't pretend like now we have the microscope and now we've unraveled all the mysteries. No, we have not.
Stops, put the link to your video in the chat, please. So anybody who's listening at this moment in time can do it. So while we're running it, see if you can grab the link, get some more views there, because it does kind of relate to this particular thing that he's just said here now anyway. So do please pop it in the chat.
Okay.
All right. So where would this information come from? From an illiterate man. And the other claim, he was a liar. Forget the idea. Why would he lie? He was persecuted. There was exiled into the desert to die. The people who followed him were tortured, had all the possessions taken away from them. Forget all that. Yeah. How could he lie? He would have had to memorize the Old Testament, the New Testament, the oral traditions of the Jews, the apocryphal books of the Christians.
This old canard, he would have had to memorize all these things. No, he wouldn't have to memorize it. You're already claiming that he knew the Old and New Testament. And when you read the Quran, he didn't know the Old. There's sections here and there that he's picked up or that have been picked up from people that obviously visited that area, but he hasn't got the proper understanding of it. And so he didn't memorize any of that sort of stuff. So please don't make that claim. That's your claim. Demonstrate that it's true. You make as if this is the case, that in fact he memorized these things. No, he didn't memorize these things. He got tidbits here and there and he tried to cobble it all together. And it's a bit of a mess and vagaries. And again, go speak to any Christian. They'll show you why. Historically, if you go to speak to historians on this matter, they will show you why the Quran doesn't match what we understand about history in that particular time, about certain of those events. So no, it's not the case.
Hash them all around in his brain, and over 23 years regurgitate them in piecemeal as if he's getting revelation. How does an illiterate man do this?
I wouldn't say he had to memorize them. And I mean, is there a way to know for sure that he was illiterate? I mean, is that just his claim?
Okay. Well, here's the thing, you see. The Quran says he's illiterate, yeah?
Okay. I mean, that's kind of circular.
Well, it's not circular. I'll tell you why it's not circular. Because if Muhammad said, if the Quran says he's illiterate, but he's not illiterate, the people of the time would say, wait a minute, you're not illiterate. You know how to read and write. Wouldn't you not?
Yeah, but how would they know? How would they know? I could say I'm illiterate and no one would be able to prove me wrong.
Well, if you say you're illiterate, are you married?
No.
You have mother and father, I'm assuming?
Yeah.
Would they confirm you're illiterate if you said you're illiterate? Would they know if you're illiterate or not?
Yeah, I mean, I get where you're going, but I'm saying it's still possible.
No. If a man has lived in a society for 40 years, people will know whether he can read or write or not. Agree?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
If he's lived in a society for 40 years,
yeah,
as an orphan boy, yeah, and he's lived in this society for 40 years, would the people know if he could read or write or not?
They could know, but at the same time, wasn't it very common to be literate at that time? I don't think literacy rate was very high in pre-Islamic.
All right, so you're agreeing with me then? He was illiterate, yeah?
I'm agreeing that it would be that he could be illiterate. I'm not saying it's impossible.
All right,
so
I'm arguing for illiteracy. You're arguing for what? You're actually agreeing with me, yeah?
I'm saying it's possible that he wasn't.
So you're just saying it was common to be illiterate, but he possibly wasn't?
Yeah. So I'm saying that since it was common, it wouldn't be surprising that they could believe that he was.
Oh, okay. So when the verse of the Quran came down saying that he was illiterate, these enemies would have said, he's not illiterate.
How would they know?
There you go. How would they know? Right? If he's pretending or he had no reason to tell everybody this is illiterate or whatever the case is. I mean, this is not probably the way I would go anyway. But if he did this, at that time, like you say, it's not difficult to pass yourself off as being illiterate, especially if there's a lot of other illiterate people and you don't have any reason to tell people you're illiterate. Then it's not particularly difficult to pass yourself like that. But like I say, it's not a strong argument that I would go with or go down that route personally. I don't know about you, Stops.
No.
The fact that most people were illiterate in Mecca, in Arabia, which you conceded, that's all the more reason that the Prophet Muhammad would have stood out if he was literate, because those few people who were literate would have been well known in that society.
Yeah, but if he pretended he wasn't illiterate for whatever reason, then he wouldn't have stood out. That's what the dream is saying. Right? He could have been literate, but pretended not to be literate. That's the point he's making.
And there are a lot of Muslims today who are saying he started off illiterate, and then because he was a merchant, he had to be literate, so he learned how to read and write later on in life. But initially, when the revelation started coming, he didn't know how to read and write yet, which does not make sense at all. And the other thing is the Quran does not even say that he's illiterate, because they're using this funny word ummi, which nobody really knows whether this is illiterate or not. So there's a whole lot of speculation going on here, and it's a red herring. It leads nowhere. It doesn't matter whether he could write or read or whatever. The point is, what is the message? Is that correct or is it wrong? That's the point.
Now, what we've gone down there, of course, is Hamza's script here with the easy to knock over straw men version of, hey, well, if you say this, that, and the other, we don't need to go down this route. And I keep saying to people, and if Dream or anybody else ever listens to this, you don't have to go down this route. The only thing that you have to question is he can be mistaken. How do you demonstrate that he wasn't mistaken? And he wasn't mistaken for 23 years. We've had people who have been convinced of things for their entire life, and either in their deathbed or after they died, we found out, or we knew even before that, they were mistaken. People can be convinced for their entire lives and yet be mistaken. How do you establish that he wasn't mistaken? That's all we need to ask.
That's a good point.
Brilliant point.
So Dream, what would happen, Dream, is if any contract had to be written or anything had to be agreed, everybody would know who the literate people were in order to get those documents done, an agreement done, for example. So even in the life of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, whenever he wanted an agreement done, he would call his scribe. They would write it. And so for 40 years, you would have to, see, it all comes to balance of probability, as I said to you, Dream. What is the balance of probability that for 40 years, a man lives in a small town, in a small tribe, and there's no formal schooling, there are no libraries. The first book written in the Arabic language, in fact, is the Quran, okay? There is no need to read or write, because basically, if you're a shepherd, you don't need to be reading things and writing things. So on balance of probability, it's quite reasonable to expect, and I think I was reading somewhere, that you could probably count on two hands, or possibly just 16 or 18 people in the whole of Mecca who were known to be literate, whereas pretty much everybody was illiterate, because there simply wasn't any need for it, you see. So it's not an unreasonable argument to make. And the very fact that there are thousands of witnesses around who actually know that this person has never written anything, never been seen reading anything, been seen anything.
Yes, give me their accounts. Give me the thousands of people who knew about this. Give me the thousands of people who say, yes, I had lunch with Muhammad today. I went and got his camel. I sold him a camel. I got these things for him. Give me those people. How come they don't exist? This is the whole thing. This is how you get a personality. If you get corroborating, accounts and evidence that somebody existed. This does not exist for Muhammad. On quite the opposite, we have evidence that Mecca did not exist the way that is described. So what are you going to do now? You cannot go and argue like this. It is futile to argue about the length of his beard or the color of his eyes or whatever if you do not have a person as such. So stop doing it.
The other thing is, he said this is an argument. Who brought this argument? It wasn't Dream. This was Hamza's nice, soft argument that he thinks he's got a good response to. We don't even need to go down here. That's why I say just stick with it. Just ignore all the rest of it and say this, because the only thing we need is the most difficult thing for them to demonstrate, which is he's mistaken. We don't need to say he's a liar, he's confused, he's this, that, and the other. All we need to say is that he's mistaken. That's it.
Exactly. That's a good point.
That's the strongest claim in our view, and the most difficult for them to respond to. But they like to respond to these other straw man versions, which are easy, or they think are easy for them to respond to, but nobody's actually made that argument. But then they jump around as if they've said something, or there's been an argument here. This wasn't Dream's argument. So if I bring up a nice, soft, easy argument and then present it as if it's something that needs to be taken seriously when the interlocutor hasn't brought it up, that's called a straw man. He's not making that claim. So don't bring up something that you can easily blow over to make yourself look good when your interlocutor hasn't said that at all.
To read. And so it's not an unreasonable argument, you see, Dream, from that basis. But it's not. It's just one argument, one facet.
Yeah. I just had something to compound it.
A huge collection of arguments, and that's the point, you see.
Let me just compound it for you, Dream. Let me just compound it a little bit more.
Okay.
So when the Prophet Muhammad came down from the mountain with this Quran, the Quraysh, they were shocked. Where's he getting this information from? This guy can't read or write. Where's he getting the information from? And so they said their top 5 poets, and if I'm not wrong, Imran has said this in the past. Some of the top 5 poets were alive at the time. Is that correct? The Arab poets.
Go on, deal with this again, Stops, if you don't mind, please.
No. Come on. This is so stupid. I don't know what.
Just explain to people what's actually the case in this thing.
You can't really know what actually is the case because everybody is telling you something different. I mean, I don't know why he actually... Okay, number one, the Quran was not revealed in one single session. It was revealed over a period of 23 years, according to the standard Muslim narrative. Now, he did not come down from the mountain with the Quran in his hand. It was not that the book was sent down. He came down with one sentence, didn't know what the hell was going on, had to go and get verified by the uncle of his boss wife, Khadija, who was a Christian, who had to tell him, no, you're a prophet, go ahead and preach the message and go with it. Now, nobody can actually verify this. Nobody can attest. Nobody can... And this is the funny thing is, if you take the Shahada, you have to say, I bear witness. You can't bear witness because you do not know Muhammad, but you are witnessing that Muhammad is the messenger. You can't. It was the people of the Quraysh who said, yeah, well, maybe there is something to it. There wasn't. It is just conjecture. It is wishful thinking. It is things that people said, and come on, they didn't believe him anyway. Look at all these stories which go against it because they had to bring up some resistance because the people didn't accept Islam in the beginning at all. That's why you have Abu Lahab. That's why you have all these stories about the people who were conspiring to kill Muhammad, that he had to flee, that he had to run away to Yathrib. And these are the stories that people don't really like hearing. But this is the way that it is. To say Muhammad came down with the Quran and this was such a miracle, absolute nonsense.
Imagine if he was alive today, Stops, and you or I or anybody else, we're not by any means the smartest or most knowledgeable. We had to interrogate him. I mean, he would end up not believing anything that he ever said again. The fact that there might have been some gullible people, even if we accept that there were some Quraysh who were gullible, just means they're gullible. They just weren't thinking critically. If you and I were back in the 7th century with our brains operating as we are today, Muhammad wouldn't get out of the starting gates. We'd have him psychologically evaluated. But the fact that there might have been gullible people who thought that he might have said something doesn't impress me in the slightest. Whether they were his enemies or not, people can be gullible whether they like you or they hate you, and they can still be gullible people. That doesn't impress me at all.
And this is like somebody coming and asking, do you believe that I was abducted by aliens? Same story. Why would I believe that? I mean, all he's doing is he's coming with a cocktail of different stories, and stories everybody knows. Everybody knows what the Zoroastrians, what the Yazidis, what the Jews, what the various other sects did, and he's just bringing up just yet another cocktail. So
yeah, but here he's going down. He's going down the route of the poets, right? That he brought this information and they couldn't understand it. It was just like, and it was better than anything they'd ever written, and so on and so forth, right? That's the line that's going down here. What this guy said, this illiterate, clueless person apparently said, was just incredible. It just blew all these knowledgeable, amazing poets away, and they were stunned, and they said it's magic. That's where he's going with this. And that the only way that could have been the case is if this information came to him from somewhere that was beyond human. That's the ultimate goal of this, rather flawed line of thinking.
Okay, there are two problems with this. The number one problem with this is that the Arabic language hadn't yet been established because the Quran codified it. So all these wonderful poets couldn't have possibly been in a position to go and in any way evaluate a Quran which consisted of maybe one or two of the chapters, because it wasn't complete yet. The other problem that we have with this, we have a lot of poets who made fun of this. We have the Al-Maris, the Al-Razis, and all these people who mocked Muhammad, who mocked the Quran, who mocked all this, who said, I mean, Al-Mari, the most famous one, you have the Christians, you have the Jews. So you have two types of people. You have the people who believe in a God but without intelligence, and you have the people with intelligence but without a God. That is a quote by a poet of 1,000 years ago. Then you have the same thing from Al-Razi. You come to us with a Quran which is full of mistakes, which is full of stupidity, and then you come to us and ask us to bring something like it. We laugh at you. We have thousands who have brought something like this. This is a quote from Al-Razi. So there were a lot of poets at the time who matched all this, and these are the things that the people like Hamza here and Abbas, they will not acknowledge. They pretend like they've never heard this.
Yeah.
Said to listen to the Quran to find out where is he getting, what is the source of his information that he's reciting, and their conclusion was astonishing. They said this is sorcery. They couldn't fathom it because it wasn't poetry. It was something next level that they could only ascribe this as supernatural.
Okay.
Now that's profound, right? So going back to my original point.
Sorry, Hamza, can I just add a little bit to that? Dream, the Quranic Arabic was a completely different way in terms of grammatical rules and constructs of writing the language. So even today, as a non-Arab,
he's just shooting himself. Everybody has just said you had all these poets evaluating the Quran that was brought and saying it's so wonderful, and now he's saying, well, the language didn't exist yet. Exactly.
How could they? Yeah, exactly. How could they then make the claim that it's all these things? We didn't bring these things because who brought all these new styles? Who decided that there was this style or whatever the case is? Is man, right? There's no criteria in the Quran that says, hey, here's the 25 different things that I'm doing in the Quran that no other person can match. It's not in there, right? So humans came up with these criteria at some point afterwards. And like you say, it's debatable whether that happened at the time the poets read this thing, right? So, but of course, as we know, Abbas is all on this thing about how wonderful the Quran is, the grammatical structure and all of this sort of stuff, because he's read Raymond Farron and he's just taken this hook, line and sinker, right?
Well, take Surah Covid.
Sorry?
Go and read Surah Covid.
Oh, I haven't read that. What's that?
Yeah, you forgot. This is a girl who came up with a poem about COVID-19, about the coronavirus, in the style of the Quran that could easily be mistaken for the original text of the Quran.
Oh, okay. Right.
It's called the Surah Covid. You can find it everywhere.
Okay. But of course, they're not going to accept that, right? Because there's all these... what's the term called? All these criteria that have been made up by men. There's 40 odd or whatever the claim, well, at least that's Mansur's claim or whatever it is, over 40 of these criteria, which are all arbitrarily made by humans, but made in such a way that you can always dismiss anything that's brought. Right? So how's it? But then again, of course, as we know in the Quran, God Himself says that you can never meet this challenge. So it's not actually a challenge anyway. No, so all you have to do is read the very next surah afterwards.
But I remember Hassan Radwan made a couple of sentences the majority of Muslims were unable to distinguish them. And then we tried this with one of the Muslims we had on the show, and he was able to pick it up. Now, I don't know whether he was just lucky or whether he was really that good, but he identified each and every one of them as a fake. But normally, Muslims were not able to do that. They got totally confused which one was Quran and which one was not. So I've only seen it once that somebody actually managed this.
Here, normal Arabic being spoken, or even the hadith, which is the words of the Prophet being spoken, I can differentiate them from when the Quran is recited, even though I don't understand Arabic. So that the language itself, and this is what Allah says in the Quran, that it's a miracle. The Quran is a miracle, miracle upon miracle. And so even a non-Arab native today, when he hears the Quran, he knows that's the Quran. And when he hears the words from the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he knows that that's not the Quran. He might not know that that is actually the words of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, but he'll be able to differentiate the two.
Well, as Stops just said, that's not the case. It's very rare for that to be the case. So your claim is not in fact true. And in fact, if it was read to you or Hamza or any of you guys, none of you could, but most Arabs or Arab-speaking people couldn't do that either. There might be the rare one here and there, but most of them, as Stops has said, probably can't do it. So how do you establish that your claim's true?
So here we have now a man in the desert in the 7th century who's known to be illiterate, but then completely rewrites the code, the constructs, as brother has just said here, the syntactical arrangements. When you study the depth of what I'm talking about, and I'm really just touching on the surface, it goes beyond any reasonable doubt that a man in the desert in the 7th century who was known to be illiterate could have literally rewritten the Arabic language.
What is quite funny is that if Muhammad was the expert, and if Abbas is able to distinguish it, how come Muhammad didn't know that part of the Quran was coming from the devil? Because we still have the satanic verses. So how does that fit into his picture?
Well, he either doesn't know about it or doesn't think it's true or whatever the case is. But you can see how utterly convinced he is, right? He just thinks this is incredible. This is marvelous. He's just taken this all on, and it's like overwhelming for him. You can see somebody that's just, it's like a flat earther that thinks that they've got the holy grail.
Exactly.
You cannot convince them the earth is round. That's how he is with this sort of stuff, right?
It's actually
He's
good
been
analogy.
utterly convinced by this.
I need to remember this.
Hamza just alluded to was that when they sent the poets to find out the most famous part.
What's this?
The comment on the screen at the moment. This is true.
Yeah.
Poets at that time came back to.
Yeah.
To what extent?
The Quraysh, and the Quraysh looked at his face, and they said that the man who left us is not the same man who is returned. In other words, they saw in his face an expression that what he's witnessed or what he's heard is something that is incredible and unusual. And they asked him, where does Muhammad get these words from? He said, give me some time. He says, give me some time. So he goes home, and then Allah reveals in the Quran what he was doing in his home by himself. He is pacing and frowning, and Allah describes this in the Quran, that he is pacing and he's frowning to think about where this Quran has come from. And he comes up with what theory? As Hamza alluded to, he says, the only thing I can say, these are not the words of Muhammad. This is not the words of any man, in fact.
Can I actually read the words?
Sorry? Read the verse, inshallah. Read the verse.
Somebody, because I know this thing exists, so I just say it was said, right? And then someone in the comments section, I don't know if they were being trolly or whether they were being genuine, they said, I've heard Hamza say this story before, where's the evidence? Or something along those lines. So basically, so Ibn Abbas narrated that Al-Walid ibn al-Mughira came to the Prophet, and the Prophet recited the Quran to him. Al-Walid seemed to be affected and softened by it.
Okay, obviously he didn't recite the Quran. He recited, or he said some part of the Quran, right? So let's just correct that straight away. The Quran wasn't around at that time for that to happen. Is that correct, Stops?
Yeah.
Yeah, so he recited a little bit that he'd heard or apparently had been revealed to him. Whatever.
Well, you can look up how many Mecca verses or how many of the sentences are being assigned or attached to Mecca. There's just a few. Because remember, in the beginning, he had 150 followers, and that's it. So the Quran came like stuttering.
Yeah, so we'd have to establish exactly when this time frame was. Does anybody know? They can probably try and claim they know the time frame, but it would have been early on before he went to Medina, right? So certainly wasn't a full Quran in any case. But whatever it was, let's just say it was the first chapter. Well, not the first chapter, but perhaps the second chapter or something like that.
Well, maybe 500 sentences from different parts of the Quran, because it was all over the show.
Yeah.
Abu Jahl heard about this, so he came to Al-Walid and said, "Don't you see that your people are collecting charity for you?" He said, "And why is that?" Abu Jahl replied, "So that they can give it to you as they see that you went to Muhammad to get some of his money." Al-Walid said, "Quraysh know that I am the wealthiest of its sons." Abu Jahl said, "So say something about Muhammad, something that would convince your people that you oppose him." Al-Walid replied, "And what can I possibly say? There is not a single man who is more knowledgeable of poetry and prose than I. Even the poetry of the jinn, and by Allah, what he, Muhammad, says, bears no resemblance to these things, by Allah. What he says has a sweetness to it and a charm upon it. The highest part of it is fruitful, and the lowest part of it is gushing forth with bounty. It dominates and cannot be dominated, and it crushes all that is under it." And Abu Jahl said, "Your people will not be pleased with you until you say something against him." And then he said, "Let me think about it." And after thinking, he said, "This is not but magic."
Okay, so here's somebody who just thought it was wonderfully said, right? The fact that that's the case doesn't make it from Allah, just means that this guy was convinced. It's like if you read something or you play some music or whatever the case is, right? And you get into a different state of mind or whatever the case may be, and you get utterly convinced that this is amazing for you. Somebody else reads it or listens to it, and they're not convinced by it. So you have one man's opinion on how it felt, or his version of this, and you're going to claim because he claimed he was the best poet and that this moved him in some way, because that's essentially what he's saying here, that somehow that means it's from God? No, that doesn't follow. It just means that he was convinced or that he liked what he heard. That doesn't mean that it's from God. And people who are literate can still do things that can move other people, right? Even if this is assuming all of this happened, of course, but what other explanations are there? There are people that can move other people without ever having been able to read or write or whatever the case may be.
SubhanAllah. So this is the enemies of Muhammad trying to come up with something, and they say, well, just challenge what he's saying. And this poet is saying, no man can do what he's saying. No man. Forget a literate man. A literate.
No, that's not what he said. Don't interpret. This is your personal interpretation. That's not what he said.
Man couldn't do this. Yeah. I couldn't do this. He's saying, I'm one of the top poets, and I can't match it. It crushes everything. It dominates everything. How is an illiterate man doing this?
And not just that, Dream, but this is something that we're not talking about that happened back then and you can't test today.
Let's just remember, by the way, this was never Dream's argument. So if you ever get into a discussion with these guys, don't go down this route, because you go down there for half an hour, they'll tell you all these wonderful things as if you made the argument that this couldn't have been the case to begin with. That wasn't his original argument. So you need to cut this off very quickly. Just demonstrate that he wasn't mistaken, because then they can't go down this route.
There are people who are linguists who look at this phenomena and have written many books and given many lectures on this, even today, because the Quran has a challenge in it. It says, if you are truthful, Allah says, bring a Quran like it. Come up with a Quran like this. Yeah. Then Allah lowers them.
No, it doesn't even say that. Now he can't even paraphrase accurately. That's not what it actually says. But wait for it. Raymond Farron's coming. Hang on just a moment.
Allah lowers the challenge. Then Allah says, come back with 10 surahs like it, 10 chapters like it.
Yes.
Then Allah lowers the challenge again, and Allah says, come back with 1 chapter like it. And you know what the shortest chapter in the Quran is?
No.
Like literally 2 lines. Just these 2 lines.
And you know what's amazing about that surah? You know what's amazing about the shortest surah of the Quran?
He doesn't even know the Quran.
What's that, sorry?
He doesn't even know the Quran. It's 3.
Is it? Okay.
Because his baby sons died, and they were mocking him, saying he's got no heirs. No one will remember Muhammad. Yeah,
I matched it several times. Come on, not difficult.
People will remember Muhammad, and these people will be like straw. Like nobody will remember them at all. Subhanallah.
So is that what the verse says? You said.
That's the right verse, isn't it? I did the right one. So basically, this is amazing. The response of the verse of the Quran. Yeah, I'm just going back to the point that Abbas was making, and I was making, and even the enemy of Islam was making when he said, I'm a top poet and I can't do this. Allah says in the Quran, Alhamdulillah, say if mankind and the jinn gathered in order to produce the like of this Quran, they could not produce the like of it, even if they were to each other assistance. So Allah says in the Quran, you can't do this, come and do anything.
Oh, wow. Allah says that you can't do better than what I do. That's not a circular tautologous argument or statement, is it? Hey, you can't do better than what I do. Why? Because I say you can't do better than what I do. Oh, that's convincing. Yeah.
Do anything like this. The greatest poets of the time says we can't do this. So there's something profound about this. Would you not agree?
No, the greatest
it's
poets
very
have
interesting.
never said this. This is you fabricating stuff. There is no poet that we have a book which says, I have tried to make the Quran or something similar to the Quran, and I have been unable to match it. There is not a single poet who said it. We have lots of poets who have said the opposite. So I don't know why these people do that. And why
Now, I
is
think
it
stops
that
what you
this
need
is-
to do is actually bring it up on screen or whatever the case is. People are not going to believe this. They're not going to believe it. They're going to say stop spamming is just saying X, Y, and Z, right? So I think it would be worthwhile at some point to bring it up and show the poets who sort of ridicule this, whatever the case is. Otherwise, they're not, if we've got any Muslims listening or anybody listens afterwards, they're not going to accept it. They're just going to say you're making statements just like the Muslims, right? So it might be worth at some point bringing up at least one or two of these things to show it.
Oh, this is very easy. I just need to look for Al-Razi and bring it up on the thing. Yeah, easy.
Okay. If you can.
Yeah, just give me
Hard
a
to
few
explain.
minutes.
Okay.
Now, that's the
Dream.
first point. But that's the first point. That's just the language, right? When
Yeah.
it talks about Moses and Abraham and Noah and Thamud and Jesus and Mary and all of these things, the Christians make the claim, and Brother Sadat, mashallah, just came out of a stream about this. Did the Quran copy the Bible? Yeah. Because the Christians make the claim that, Muhammad copied from the Apocrypha, like the infancy gospel of Thomas to get the idea of Jesus talking from the cradle. That means Muhammad must have known about the infancy gospel of Thomas, which means he must have known the Apocryphal book of the Jews. And then when they talk about Habil and Kabil, they say that, this is from the oral traditions of the Jews. That means Muhammad must have known the oral traditions of the Jews. And this is not just in one place of the Quran, a bit of Bible and a bit about, it's throughout it. Okay. And the amazing thing is the Old Testament, the Arabic Old Testament did not arrive in the Arabian Peninsula, so 400 years after he died.
But weren't there Jews in the area? There were just many
There's
Jewish
a difference
tribes.
between Jews being in the area and memorizing the Old Testament and knowing all the stories of Moses and Noah and all of these things.
Also,
but
Dream. What you've got to realize here is that those books of the Apocrypha, they were buried in caves 200 to 300 years before the Prophet Muhammad, peace on him, was even born. That literature of the Apocrypha were dug out of those caves in the 19th century, 20th century, and they were discovered. So those writings didn't even exist. Another thing, Dream, is that where the biblical records or the Jews at the time made mistakes about historical events, the Quran actually, for some miraculous reason, of course we would say it was from God as a consequence, would
Just
actually
stop for a
correct
moment.
these and would.
Look at this. This is Al-Razi. This is 1,000 years ago. You claim that the evidentiary miracle is present and available, namely the Quran. You say, whoever denies it, let him produce a similar one. Indeed, we shall produce 1,000 similar from the works of rhetoricians, eloquent speakers, and valiant poets, which are more appropriately phrased and state the issues more succinctly. They convey the meaning better, and their rhymed prose is in better meter. By God, what you say astonishes us. You are talking about a work which recounts ancient myths and which is at the same time is full of contradictions and does not contain any useful information or explanation, and then you say, produce something like it?
Yeah, there we go. I've screenshotted that, so we've got that as well.
Yeah, okay. It's a work of fiction. Yeah, of course. It's in the Quran, you stupid idiot. I mean, he's such an idiot.
Well, but he studied
Anyway.
the Quran stuff, so you must be
Yeah.
wrong.
Anyway, here we have. I mean, this is Al-Razi. Okay, this is one of the so-called poets of that era. So what are you going to do now?
Oh, they're just going to dismiss that, right? 'Cause it
Should I
doesn't
bring
fit
the other one
narrative.
as well?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah,
it's not-
if ever get to speak to these guys, bring that up, right? And I bet you what they'll do is they'll go look at it like suddenly they're going to try and do some historical scholarly work on this to try and show that that's not the case. They won't do that for the claim of this other poet. They'll do it for anything that goes against their narrative. Then suddenly they're going to go look at it with a critical eye. Well, this is typically how these guys operate.
and would actually relay the story differently. And it's only centuries after, when these manuscripts were discovered, that we find out actually that there was truth to this, that there was information that was lost to Prophet Muhammad. If you go to a channel called One Message, Many Prophets, is that right? Is that the right channel? On that channel, you will go through Egyptology and many other of these phenomena.
I've watched videos.
Yeah. So what I'm trying to say to you is these are just a couple of little facets we're talking about.
Yeah.
If you look at the works of Professor Raymond Farrin of
What did I say? Here we go. Professor Raymond Farrin. Let's hear all about this amazing guy that Abbas is so taken with.
The concentric patterns, the patterns within the Quran. And remember, this was an oral tradition. How does a man in the desert in the 7th century who's getting verses not in any order, they're coming, the last verse coming first, the middle verse coming second, or whatever, and the
yeah, completely exactly the opposite of what we would expect. Don't do it in a what's the word when one follows the other. Always that sort of word. Sorry,
are you talking about the lemmings?
No. When a story goes from the beginning to the end, what's the term for that? It often escapes me. I don't know why.
From the beginning to the end.
Yeah, chronological order. For whatever reason, I often forget that word. Let's not expect the book to be written in chronological order, because then we could have followed it even better. Let's have it all random, and then you want to claim that there's all these patterns. Look, people can find patterns in anything. All you need to do is look for some arbitrary pattern and then claim there's a pattern. This is not difficult. But I'd love to, hopefully we'll get around to reading this Raymond Farrin. Like I say, if you have already stopped, maybe we can look at this. I'd love to have this guy on and for him to try and present this, and then we critique him on this. And I'd love to have Abbas sitting in the audience listening without being able to open his mouth, so we go straight to the source.
Okay, I just remember him just repeating the stuff.
Sorry?
I just remember him repeating the stuff. He didn't do anything original.
Farrin, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I haven't looked into it, so that's why I'm asking. But it would be worth reading again and saying, how's this not arbitrary? How are you not just cherry-picking something? We are pattern-seeking animals, right, as human beings. If you want to find a pattern, you can find a pattern in anything. And then how do you claim that this is something objective and not something that you sucked out of your thumb to come up with a pattern? You can find a pattern in any book. Hey, look, every 6th sentence, it starts with a T or whatever the case may be. And hey, this verse says this, and hey, this says this. Why should anybody be convinced with this? If you predicted it ahead of time and there was a way to accurately follow that prediction through, you would have my attention. But post hoc reasoning, looking for a pattern and then telling us there's a pattern, utterly unconvincing. But again, Abbas is very, very much biased in his favor. Anything that sounds to his brain amazing, which shouldn't sound amazing if you stood back and looked at it with a critical eye, he will just take on board, right? And then it's just amazing. So he's all about this whole thing. I've said it many times. And Raymond Farrin is like the second coming of Muhammad to him.
The Quran being revealed, perhaps some of it, in year 1 and some of it in year 10. How are you supposed to then bring all of these verses together 23 years later from memory, and it has these concentric patterns and chiasm and parallelism, and it's a flow of the language. So when you read the Quran, though we don't call it poetry, but there is this beautiful harmonious rhythm that emanates from the reading of the Quran. How do you get dozens and...
This is all just your subjective opinion, but at the end of your subjective opinion, you will have convinced yourself, I'm sure. You won't have convinced anybody else who's paying attention.
Dozens of verses in these surahs and chapters, all rhyming, and they're not all hodgepodge and mixed up. And yet this was all memorized over 23 years, while verses simultaneously were being revealed from other chapters, some coming before, some coming after. When you study everything in its collective, I mentioned to you about balance of probability. The argument becomes so inconceivable that it was just some random event.
Only in your mind, buddy.
That I think what a person would be doing by denying it, they would be showing complete, I believe, honesty on the subject, and they would be offering ultra skepticism on something that they would not apply on anything else throughout life. And I think that's an unreasonable stance to take, quite frankly.
Well, you've convinced yourself there, buddy. Good job we don't have to go by your standard there. But we should be more skeptical. I'm not saying ultra skeptical. We should be more skeptical of supernatural claims than claims that we mundanely have in our lives. And if you don't think that's the case, then why aren't you using that same standard with other supernatural claims that are outside of Islam? Suddenly there you do become more skeptical yourself. You just don't even notice you're doing it.
Also,
I'm not surprised you're afraid of hellfire, mate.
So what do you mean by that?
I'm not surprised hellfire concerns you, because we're giving you clarity here.
No, you're making claims. You don't know the counter arguments against it, and you think that this is a done deal. But again, you're the Dunning-Kruger, poster child. So no wonder from your, very limited perspective, you think you're giving all this wonderful information, and it should just be undeniable to anybody. But anybody that invokes a bit of critical thinking, this is just very weak. Nobody should believe this. In fact, everybody should be skeptical of everything that you guys say and go look it up. And go look up what other people have said against it. That's what anybody who thinks critically does. They wouldn't be convinced by your rhetoric on this panel, and they shouldn't be.
That you should be grasping onto and trying to research and study and reflect upon. Again,
Dream. Also, when we're talking about
find counters that are just based.
By the way, I did say to you, there's going to be a lot of preaching and stuff here, and pressure on the sky, right? Again, we're going to start hearing it now.
When we're talking about these linguistic aspects of the Quran, like Brother Abbas was mentioning the concentric themes and the parallelism and all of that, it's not that you just have to take Muslims at their word. There are ways that you can look into this and research into this, even without knowing Arabic completely. So, for example, I'd like to put this out there is, if you just type in linguistic miracles of the Quran, Noman Ali Khan, or just type in linguistic.
Well, he's just another apologist like you, so why should we care what he says? You're appealing to other apologists who believe the same thing as you, and then you say you can just type it into Google. But when something is typed into Google that you don't like, and Hamza's perfect at this, where did you get that information? That's from unreliable. Those are from bad sources. But as soon as you want to claim that you could type it in and go to one of your fellow apologists, then somehow that's an authoritative source. Can you guys actually be consistent? I don't think you can.
Linguistic miracles of the Quran into YouTube, you'll get a whole bunch of videos, including animated videos, illustrated videos that make it simpler for non-experts or non-speakers of Arabic, which will demonstrate different aspects of those linguistic miracles.
No, they won't demonstrate it. They will make assertions. Then if you don't understand Arabic, how could you possibly know? So you either accept it or you're skeptical of it. I know which one we are.
That's one way that you can think about it rationally. You can consider the claim that's being made. And another thing to take into consideration is, again, what was the consensus of the poets at the time? They basically conceded.
Where did you get the consensus of the poet? What evidence do you have that the poets of the time, quote unquote, however many there are, were of a consensus? Where's that claim? And why should we take that seriously?
That what the Prophet was reciting.
Sure, go for it.
This is Abu Al-Mari. I was looking for the long version, but I can't find the long version. I can only find the short one. The short version is the inhabitants of the earth are of two sorts. Those with brains, okay, he actually uses intelligence, but no religion, and those with religion, but no brains. So this is also a poet of 1,000 years ago. Live stream tomorrow, join or get destroyed. Oh, yes.
Why don't you get them to come here? They don't want to let some of us on there. They don't go out of their safe space. They have 3, 4, 5 on one, so you can't have an intellectual discussion. As you've seen here, they all dogpile. Why don't you get your lions out of the sheep's den and step into the black hole? See if they can step over.
Why is he hiding behind others? Why doesn't he do it
Get
himself?
them to come here or come to the Gin and Tonic show. What will they say? They'll make excuses. And if you're an intellectual Muslim, that should give you pause and think to yourself, but these are weak guys, because if me or Stops or anybody else is an Islamophobe, surely these guys with all this knowledge will be able to deal with us Islamophobes. What do they do instead? They duck and dive and suggest that Islamophobes, and they're not going to deal with it. They're not going to bring viewers. Well, they should bring viewers to show everybody how good they are. What do? They say in a safe space, they let one person on at a time. They run through long rhetoric like this. They don't let people on that know a lot more than these random people who are coming on. They carefully avoid this. This is a propaganda exercise, and we're exposing it. These guys won't come to us. Myself, Stop Spamming, James SC has been on the channel at least once, each of us, and some of them have been banned now because they're supposedly Islamophobes. This is just weak. And if you're intellectually honest, this should concern you. I appreciate it probably doesn't. Get them to come to us.
And it would be so nice to show, for them to show how weak we are But they are so shit scared of rational arguments that they will not let us on, even though this would be wonderful propaganda for them. Okay, I just wanted to show the inhabitants of two shores. This is Al-Mari. This is also 1,000 years ago. So don't tell me that all these poets all agreed with this and everybody was so in awe of the Quran. They were not. Sorry.
Yeah. But they'll say it as if it's a fact of the matter. They either don't know this or they don't care about it, or they've somehow dismissed it in their own mind without good reasons and evidence.
Reciting is something they could not match. It's something that they could not defeat. So we can take the testimony of experts on such an issue like this as well. For example, now some people might not like this example because I don't mean to compare the Quran with rap, but I'm trying to think of some kind of modern urban example that might make sense.
As soon as they do this is just a waste of time, right? I'd be interrupting here. Thanks very much. I don't need your allegories, your analogies. I don't need any of this sort of stuff. I get it. Let me summarize it so you don't go into a long story. You just think this is so wonderful from this guy that couldn't have known anything. The only possible answer is that it came from God. Well, even if I granted that it was amazing, and the only possible answer is not that it came from God, but it could have come from some advanced intelligence that wanted to see how gullible humans are and probably are laughing at themselves now if it were true that you gullible guys still believe it came from God. Maybe this is all just an experiment. You've got no way to demonstrate that's not the case. But going into analogy is just a waste of time. An analogy is only there if somebody doesn't understand something. And I'm hoping that Peace, or whatever his name is, does understand this. But remember, this is not for him necessarily. This is for the audience. This is just all rhetoric and preaching for the audience. Can you see the comments that are coming up here? The gullible and hypnotic audience are here for their sermon. The other guy there is just window dressing that they can answer a question, then all of them get to talk over him for about 10 minutes where he doesn't get to say anything.
And Jen is making a very good point. I'm just going to throw in there that lots of Buddhist scriptures are written in the same poem-like manner for easy memorization. There are lots and lots of books. You have this in Sri Lanka. You have this. You have all over. You have brilliant books, because I went into the Bhagavad Gita and I went into some of the Tamil literature just to get a whiff of it. And my goodness, this was really, really well written. The Quran is really bad literature. There is no way around it. It's really badly written. So don't come to me there's some miracle there. It really is not.
And the other thing is, stops. Imagine if somebody like Darren Brown, I hope you've heard of him, for the audience that haven't, he's a kind of an illusionist here in the UK, but he's a mental illusionist, and he knows a lot about psychology and how to, understand what people are thinking, how to
manipulate them without them knowing.
To manipulate their thoughts using various techniques that most humans have no clue on. He went back to the 7th century. They think he's God himself. That's how good he is. You can make somebody, I kid you not, go look it up on YouTube. He can make somebody fall asleep on the telephone. They pick up the phone. He says certain things in the phone. I don't know the exact words, but I know that the basic overall thing that's going on. He floods the mind with gibberish, and then he says sleep, 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 sleep. And the mind, because it's been flooded with this and it doesn't know what to do with it because it's entirely gibberish, it just follows the next available command that sounds coherent. And on a weak mind, I won't say weak mind, but a mind that's open to this happens. They filmed this, right? And it doesn't work on all human beings.
Robert says he's been there.
You're going, what the hell's going on here, right? I mean, he's good at it. Once you know what he's doing, you go, okay, I know the technique now. And it doesn't work, like I say, it doesn't work on everybody. He's got people to forget where they're going to get off on the tube. Go watch the video on the tube. He's saying certain things to people, and he says to the guy, what station are you getting off? The guy says, I'm getting off this station. Then he starts talking to the guy using certain language patterns. He says, where are you getting off again? The guy's looking up on the thing. They've got the camera like watching here. This is live on a London Underground. And the guy's like, I don't know where I'm getting off. Taps him on the shoulder and goes, oh yeah, Edgware Road, or whatever it was, right? So suddenly he can remember it. Now anybody who's watching this would go, this guy is God, or he's possessed by the jinns, or whatever the case may be. No, it's just simple techniques that have been learned over time, right? He went over to America, and the fortune teller type people, he convinced them he was one of them. They wanted to bring him into the Hall of Fame over there. So there's people like this today who are exceptionally good at convincing people about things that if you don't know what's going on, you would think this guy was a god or a jinn or somebody that was uniquely special. Go and watch Darren Brown. You will be amazed, especially if you don't know what's going on. You'll think it's all been put on. You'll think it's an act.
So I want you to imagine a 40-year-old fisherman from the maritime provinces from Nova Scotia. He's a fisherman, let's say, right? He's never been to the big city. And he comes to downtown Toronto and he joins like a rap battle, which has, which is, you know, a whole bunch of top battle rappers are coming together for this rap battle.
Eminem.
Yeah, okay, Eminem. Yeah, that's the only name I know. And he defeats Eminem and he defeats all these other battle rappers. Everyone is surprised. They're like, dude, how long have you been rapping for? And he's like, this is the first time I'm doing it, right? So then you question his family and his friends, like, does he listen to rap? And they're like, no, he's a fisherman. Okay, well, maybe he listens to it on YouTube in his basement at night. No, we don't have internet connection. So how did this guy defeat all these you know, battle rappers when he's not known to listen to rap? He doesn't have an internet connection. He doesn't hang around with rappers. He's 40 years old. This is the first time he's ever rapping. It would really make you think, right?
Yeah, but
I know the skeptic will say, well, that doesn't mean he's a prophet from God. No, of course not. In 2020, with the example of rap, that's not the case.
There you go. In 2020, when people, well, some people at least can invoke critical thinking, but back then, to an ignoramus group of people, they might be more convinced. So what? That's not an argument in your favor, my friend. So your analogy is very poor.
Not the case. But in the 7th century Arabia, when what he's reciting has moral teachings, when it's teaching you about God, when it's confirming and correcting previous scriptures, and there's many examples that we gave in the previous live stream. If you want to afterwards, if you want to check out EFDawah, the whole topic is the Quran simply copied from the Bible? When you put all of that information together, like Brother Abbas said, when you put all of the evidence together, then it becomes very clear that something is going on here. This is more than just the speech of a human being at this point.
I mean, from the skeptic's point of view, though, you also have to understand that aren't these also all coming from Islamic sources, like all these stories that you're telling me, like about the poets, you know, being surprised, calling him a sorcerer.
Okay. So your premise now is if history is coming from those who is writing about, it's not reliable. Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm not saying it's not reliable by default. I'm saying,
is that what you're saying?
For example,
the same old tactic. Is that what you're saying? No, it is not what you're saying. Stop doing that. Or listen to this and be aware that this is going to happen.
That's his MO, right? Is let me mischaracterize and misrepresent you. He does it all the time. He's been doing it for years, as long as I've seen him do it. I was in Speaker's Corner and I kind of got a bit frustrated with this when he was doing it with Skydive. I was literally standing next to Phil and recording. It's on Speaker's Corner channel. If you go look back, one of the discussions, I think it was the first time he ever spoke to Skydive, Phil, because he went, oh, I hear, you know, you're the man, blah, 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 right? And then proceeded to misrepresent him multiple times, saying, is this what you said? Because, of course, it all went over his head. He didn't understand it. Phil was talking about cosmology and science and stuff that he has no clue about. And so every single time he misrepresented, until eventually I said something, I can't remember, something like, you keep doing this, you know, you keep, you know, something like, you know, you say what you want to believe or whatever it was. I'd have to go listen back. But even I was frustrated because I heard Phil kept saying, no, that's not what I'm saying. No, that's not what I'm saying. But by the third time, I'm like getting frustrated because I just quietly was listening and I was filming right next to him. Right? So this has been going on for years.
The Egyptians wrote their history. Can you rely on that history?
What do you mean? Like, I mean, if it's...
Well, the Egyptians wrote about their history, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, the Egyptians have actually got hieroglyphics there, and we're not going to accept if they make supernatural claims. If they made some sort of historical claim and there's some way to corroborate it, we're probably going to take that reasonably seriously. But there's actual writings on the walls there that have stood the test of time. They've been dated back to 6,000 years, blah, 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 right? So there's something. You guys don't have that. You claim to have an oral tradition. What am I going to accept? Something with writing on the wall, we can date the writing, or something where you claim Chinese whispers were so amazing that they couldn't possibly make a mistake. I'm not convinced. I don't know who else is. You guys obviously are.
The Egyptians are reliable when they write what happened in their history?
I wouldn't be able to tell if they are or not. It's what they wrote. So I guess.
I'm talking about you now. I'm talking about you now. Do you accept the Egyptians know what they're talking about when they write about their own history?
I guess.
Right. So when the Arabs write about their own history, what's your problem?
It's not just Arab. It's also because these are stories aimed to prove the prophethood, and it's also coming from the people who are seeking to prove the prophethood.
Dream, I think you're missing the point here. And the point here is this, Dream. You see, again, we talk about balance of probability. You see, if your neighbor came to you and he said to you, Dream, I'm a prophet of God. You got to pray 5 times a day now. You got to wake up at 5 in the morning, and your last prayer is about 8, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock in the evening. You have to fast in the month of Ramadan, and you have to accept me as a prophet of God. And by the way, this is the revelation that's coming down to me. Okay. Now, what would your honest approach be, Dream? You'd probably think this guy's probably lost his marbles, right?
Yeah.
You'd probably think this guy's gone nuts. You wouldn't follow this person because you'd say,
well, anybody who's thinking critically will say, why do you believe that's true? What evidence have you got for those claims? Because many people have made those claims. Why are you claiming to be the case? How do you know you're not deluded? That's what at least I and hopefully other people who are critically, we wouldn't just dismiss it out of hand. We would certainly be highly skeptical, but we would ask this particular person, our neighbor, whoever it is, questions to see if they have any good reasons or any reasons that they should be convinced or that we should be convinced of what they're saying. That's what at least I and others potentially would do.
This is just craziness, right? Now, here we have tens of thousands of people who are convinced by this message. This is where
oh wow, ad populum, because tens of thousands of people are convinced that haven't met Muhammad, haven't spoken to him, or even if they have, does that make it true? No.
Balance of probability comes in. We have hundreds and hundreds of accounts, often independent chains of accounts that end up in different.
Where's all this evidence? If this was the case, your scholarly thing wouldn't have holes, as Yasir Qadhi said. But instead, when it's put under scrutiny the same way that the Christian things are put under scrutiny, it doesn't stand up. Where's all these hundreds of things you're claiming to have? But hey, you can make the claims because it sounds good to the gullible ear. Now produce these hundreds of things.
Different parts of the world saying the same thing. We have coins.
What was that? Hundreds of things from different parts of the world saying the same thing. Let me just go back a moment there. 2013. Just hear that again.
Often independent chains of accounts that end up in different parts of the world saying the same thing.
What is he talking about? Different parts of the world saying the same thing. Have you got any idea what he's talking about?
What he's trying to allude to is that Islam is not tied to a country, not a single area, but it's all over the planet.
Okay, how do we establish that's the case? I actually thought about this the other day, right? If it were the case that these 124,000 messages have gone out to every single thing, the very least we would expect is an accurate account similar to the Quran in some other far-off land, South America, Alaska or something like that, that said there was this last prophet that was in this far-off land called Mecca or whatever the case, and you had to turn this way. Have we got anything that remotely says that in any other far-off culture, anywhere else in the world at that time or any other time, relatively soon after that? Because eventually Islam spread, and so other people would have gone to say that obviously doesn't count. So we needed to have been spread either at the time or very shortly afterwards, where the message couldn't have got out by people being traveled in caravans and stuff. Have we got any accounts like that anywhere else in the world, ideally in far-off countries?
Not that I know of.
Nope, exactly.
We have coins from that era that have Quranic ayahs on, for example, or we have inscriptions on rocks, and we have.
What evidence does that tell you? So you've got to stop with this guy, because all he'll do is he'll do the gish gallop here of say a lot of different things, and the gullible people who are listening in the audience will go, wow. At no point will any of them stop and go, hang on a moment, let's go through each one of these. If there were coins on there, what does that tell you? What evidence, what's the conclusion you can draw there were coins? If you go listen to Tom Holland in his book, In the Shadow of the Sword, this happened 200 years afterwards, or a certain amount of time after Muhammad. What conclusion can we draw? One of the conclusions, as I remember him saying, is that this was sort of put together afterwards to try and rally together the Arabs under one particular leader. At least that's part of what he was alluding to, if I remember it correctly. So it doesn't establish that either Muhammad lived or that, in fact, it's evidence of the things that he said. Some people put some stuff on coins potentially at some point in time. Maybe it was to honor an idea that somebody made long ago. Just put every one of these ideas scrutiny one after another. But they're not allowed to do this, of course. So he goes gish galloping along here, and to the gullible ear, this just sounds like it's amazing. Until we put it under the microscope, and then it doesn't quite look so amazing.
So we have inscriptions on buildings coming from that era, confirming what the Quran is actually saying. This is all. You can go and check it all. If you want to go on a website called Islamic Awareness, they have all the pictures of the coins and the references of where these inscriptions are, etc., etc. You sort of build a picture, you see, of all this collaborating evidence, and the only conclusion that you can arrive at that is reasonable, very reasonable, to accept these claims. Because remember, Islam had many enemies. So where are those hidden documents, maybe from those enemies?
Once that stops.
Why did Islam have many enemies?
Listen to this one. All these people met the Prophet and gave accounts. Yeah, maybe one day we should do the history of Muhammad, everything that you've acquired, because this guy has met Muhammad. Please show us the evidence that they met Muhammad. The Muhammad that's talked about in the Quran and the Surah and so forth. Can you produce that evidence, or are you just going to claim this because you heard somebody else say this, so you're repeating? This is what happens, of course. And because they're in these sort of echo chambers, one guy says something like this on the screen. Other Muslims go, oh, look, this guy said it. He must know what he's talking about. I'll repeat that. And so it becomes a Chinese whisper.
Yeah,
Everybody
true.
else starts repeating as if it's a factually true statement. This is how human beings operate, right? And this is how people become convinced for bad reasons. People will be convinced by this, and the next guy will say the same thing. Look at all the European, African, and Persian explorers in history who are not Muslims who met the Prophet. Just provide your evidence. Can you do that? Guarantee, I bet my house, whoever this person is could never do that. But he'll claim it, and the other Muslims in the chat, and maybe even these guys on the panel will go, look, he said all of that. And then they will repeat that statement without ever going to look it up, because it already confirms what they want to believe to be true.
Enemies, because remember, not everybody accepted Islam. Some people ran off to Africa. They ran off into the east or the west because they didn't want Islam. So where are their writings when they gave it to the Christians or they gave it to other historians that this man Muhammad is a fraud because the Quran, he said he was illiterate, but he wasn't illiterate. He said it was this, but it wasn't this. Where are the? What you have to realize is that in the absence of all of these counterclaims, counter evidence, counter history, that it is only reasonable then to accept that this narrative on balance of probability probably is true. But if you go through that ultra skepticism, and this is very dangerous because most of, if not all of our knowledge comes from assessing things on balance of probability. Is it reasonable to believe this, or is it reasonable to believe that? And that's all we're asking you to do, is use your reason. And one of the things, Dream, that we're told about is the hellfire that you're so afraid of, that the people who are being thrown into the hellfire, the angels will say to them, did you not use your reason? Allah gave you all this evidence, all this, you had all this around you. You had people that came.
No, Allah didn't give you the evidence. People like you claim to give people evidence, and your bar for evidence is, I'll repeat this because I heard this or saw this on some websites, and it confirms what I already believe. I'd love to have Abbas on Gin and Tonic. I've said it before. Do you think he'd ever come on there and just bring one claim and we go through it? And then we see if he's as confident at the end as he is here in his echo chamber, or any of these guys for that matter.
Came to you, and you didn't use your reason, you didn't think about these things carefully. And so what we're saying to you is, please take this as a great opportunity, as a sign from Allah that He's given you an opportunity where we can help you through this process. We can show you the different, we've literally touched the surface. We literally have just not even touched the surface. Like
he keeps saying that. He keeps saying that. He's always said, well, we're only scratching this. Well, why don't you take one point and go a little bit deeper and show us what there is to discover, instead of constantly saying, well, we're only scratching the surface, we're not going down and blah, blah, blah. Take one and do it. Come on.
And better yet, come and do it with people who are skeptical, that'll invoke some critical thinking, not somebody that's come on once and already believes in a God.
Yeah.
Although he did ask a reasonable question in the beginning, right? Take something, we're going to ask you for the evidence, and we're going to look it up and so forth, right? And we'll see if you're as confident as you think you are. Bring one of them. Bring Raymond Farron, whatever it is. And let's do that.
So I wasn't denying the history as a whole. I'm saying that these stories are coming from hadith, and they aren't very objective, unbiased sources.
I don't think you understand hadith, my friend. What do you think hadith are?
They're narrations of what the Prophet said.
Narrations by who?
By the Prophet, but they're collected by Muslims.
Collected by people who heard him say it, yeah?
Yeah.
Claim to hear him say it.
And multiple chains, as Abbas said, in different parts of the world, yeah?
Okay.
Okay. Now, if you can tell me something in history that you've heard, that you can tell me the witnesses to that thing, tell me. Give me their names. Give me their names, and tell me that you know who they were. You know their biographies. You know they were honest people, and they were definitely there.
This claim that people knew that these were honest people, knew what they had for breakfast and all this sort of stuff, it's just mind-boggling that he claims that people did this, that people knew this, as if this was widely known, like you went to the library, or you knew that this person couldn't have been mistaken about whatever the case is. And as Dream says, or may say still, I'm not sure if he did or if he still will, is you only need the first person to be mistaken, and everybody else, even if we had granted that they could somehow accurately, orally represent or repeat what's being said, If the first person got it wrong, or one person in the chain got it wrong, and everybody else kept on repeating it, then you'd have the mistake in there. But how does anybody after the first person know that what the first person said was correct? How do you establish that? You're just taking it on hearsay, you're repeating what you heard, the next one's repeating it. If we're granting that it could be accurately and perfectly preserved orally, how do you establish the first person is correct? Well, he walked with Muhammad. Well, how do you know that's true? Right? We can do the same thing to you that you do to the Christians. And then all you're going to do is, oh, we've got all these things. Well, how do you know that they are correct? Because this one said it, because that one said it. How do you know the original guy was correct? And I think Dream actually makes that point at some point as well.
You can't do it. Don't even try. Don't even think about trying to. You can't.
No, don't try and do it. Right? I'm going to make a claim. Don't even try to challenge my claim. Don't do it. Right?
No, I'm not saying I can. I'm
No,
saying that.
So this just hadith is more profound than any history you believe.
No, I'm saying that just because we don't have the opposing opinions, say, of enemies, like you said.
You believe history, yes?
Yeah.
You believe what happened at the Battle of Waterloo, yes?
Sure.
Right. So we have something more profound than any history you get about the Battle of Waterloo. Yeah.
What should be the first question that everybody asks here? Type it in the chat. What would you ask at this moment in time when he claims that he's got something more profound than anything else in history? We'll see what people come up with.
We have the people who witnessed these events occurring. We got a biography of them, like MI5. We know who they were.
This is comical at this stage. The fact that this guy can say this with a straight face, right? You know, if I heard this, I'd think somebody's trolling. But the look on his face, I think he's utterly convinced of this, right? He's so utterly convinced, which makes it so utterly sad.
We know who's saying what. We know if they were known to be liars, we wouldn't accept it. If we knew they weren't in that area at that time when they were supposed to say they were there, it wouldn't be accepted. There's a whole science behind this. So say just
science. They love this word.
Oh yes, because it somehow gives it more credibility when you throw the word science in. We've got the science of hadith. Well, now that you've got this, well, I was skeptical. Now you said you've got the science of it. Well, now, do you know what? I've given up my skepticism. That must be the case because you've thrown that word in as well.
Hadith is more profound than any history you believe. Any history.
The other thing is, it's not just the historical.
But look at this, right? This is all preaching now. These are just claim after claim. The Gish Gallop, for those who don't know, is a Christian apologist that used to throw out claim after claim after claim in very short order. Like he'd throw 10 things out in 2 minutes so that his interlocutor couldn't respond to all 10. And then he'd say, and to the couple he did, he might say something or might not. And he said, look, I made all these other claims and they haven't been refuted because he's Gish Galloped and thrown them all out. At this point, they're all making claims. Yeah, this is all a big, long Gish Gallop and a preaching. And the one interlocutor against 5. And this Nazim guy isn't even saying a word here, right? So you've got 3 of them, the top 3 guys in particular, saying something. Occasionally Sadat pops in. This other guy isn't saying anything. And so these guys are just preaching nonstop. In fact, it's mostly these 2 on the left.
Historical testimony that you have to that you need to go on, right? We have the testimony of today as well too. We have hostile testimony indirectly today as well too, because the challenge of the Quran to present anything like it, this challenge was taken up even just several years ago by some Arab Christians, including Anis Sharosh, and they produced what they thought would be a superior version of the Quran called the True Furqan. Did you hear of that, Dream On?
I've heard that it was recited.
Is that something you've heard, Stops?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see what he has to say about it.
Someone couldn't tell a difference. So I've heard. I couldn't remember much though.
Okay, but my point is that in this day and age of the internet, censorship and all these things are much more difficult. How many Arab Christians do you see celebrating the True Furqan?
What did you say there?
I said no. It's not more difficult to apply censorship in today's day and age. It's actually the opposite.
Not many.
Well, none. I mean, even they don't take that seriously, right?
Okay.
So this.
Yeah, but the Arab Christians don't take the Quran seriously. So why would they take the True Quran or whatever it was seriously?
Furqan.
What's your point here? The fact that they're not taking a book other than the Bible seriously is somehow a point in your favor? I mean, did you misspeak there, or are you just not thinking correctly? Why should the Arabs take that seriously? As if, presumably, what you mean is they don't take it. They would take it if it was as good as the Quran or it met the challenge. What they would all be talking about. Is that what you mean?
Look, Rob, you need to understand here. They were very clear about this. They said we are not in any way claiming that this is, I don't know, any way proof or evidence for the non-existence of the Islamic God. It just means that the claim that is being put out there is not a valid claim because it's easily refuted. And this is all that they said. And this is, I think, our approach as well. We don't say that this refutes your God. It makes your claim invalid. That's all that we're doing, invalidating your claims. That's it. And they were very
This is
clear.
kind of what happens. I'm sorry, going back to the example of the rap battle, this is what happens as well too. It's not necessarily a vote, but you just see from the audience's reaction, like, okay, no, that didn't work, that works, right? So, and this is what.
So you're going to take the audience reaction as to whether something is true or not, or what, exciting or whatever. Go watch Darren Brown, see what the audience does there. They're absolutely amazed by it. And in fact, if you watch it, you go, this is pretty damn good. You know, and even when you get to understand some of the concepts behind it, you still go, this is still impressive. In order to do this, and I've seen and sort of seen some of the background stuff, I'm going, this is pretty good. I know what he's doing there. And I'm impressed by it, even when I know on occasions what he's doing. When I don't know what he's doing, I'm going, that's still impressive. I know there's some technique at the back of it. I'm still going, it's pretty impressive. Right? But does that mean that it's true that he is, in fact, you know, some guy that can, you know, read people's minds? Well, he himself says he can't read it in the true sense of reading somebody's mind, i.e. knowing the exact thought that is in there, but he can manipulate them, and he notices certain eye patterns and other things that are going on, and he can pick things up that to the rest of us, it's just like he's you know, it looks like it's reading minds, but in fact it's not.
Do you remember James Randi when he came on stage and he was starting his speech? He then said, you guys don't know what's going on. You think I'm speaking into a microphone. This is not a microphone. This is a nose hair trimmer. But because he was holding it in front of his mouth, people obviously believed that this was a microphone, that he was speaking into a microphone. The same thing, he was wearing glasses, and he says, the same way as these glasses are not real. Look, I can put my finger through them. They just look like glasses. And people are easily fooled, you know, by little things like that. This is how magicians work, drawing attention to something else. And that is all that Darren is doing.
Correct. And human beings are extremely gullible with these sort of things, right? We're not good at differentiating certain of these things.
Did you see the video by Veritasium where he's sitting in a frame, or he's lying in a frame, which absolutely 100% is just oscillating? No, it's not. It's turning all the way around, but the brain cannot process it. So even though he is lying inside the frame and you can see that he is turning, the brain will not allow you to do that. You cannot convince yourself that this thing is turning. You are automatically turned. It is oscillating. You cannot convince yourself otherwise.
There's so many of these things out there on the internet that shows how poor our visual cortex is, or our understanding, whatever the case is, right? So none of this is convincing by appealing to the wondrousness of the audience or how they might be convinced. People are easily convinced about things that they don't know or that we're not evolutionarily evolved to be very good at.
What happened during the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him, is that the rival poets who were trying to contend with him or trying to defeat his recitation of the Quran, they oftentimes ended up shooting each other down. So they would become critics of each other and say, no, man, that's not as good. Mine is better. Yours is not as good.
So what is this? An anecdote.
That's what happened.
Just anecdotal. There's nothing there. I've got Why So Religious here on the screen. I tried getting on Hamza's Den yesterday. They dropped the link. When I turned on my computer and asked again, they said they were ending. But then they took 2 more guests.
Oh, yeah. I mean, they do that. Maybe, I don't know if they know who he is, right? Hopefully they don't, and he can get on there. But if they've heard of him or know who he is, they probably won't let him on for whatever reason, right?
But what this Sadat is doing is really, this is just anecdotal. He's just relating stories.
Yeah, this is just stories, right? But this is all about it, right? And again, I mean, Dream is there. I'm not sure whether they're actually trying to convince him, but it's more so for the audience. I don't know how many people they had watching at this stage. I don't think you can see there, but they normally have 800 or up to 1,000. The other night they had about 1,300. It's crazy how many gullible people will watch this, right, to convince themselves to feel better about their own religion.
Yeah, but they need confirmation. I mean, Islam is being shaken by the foundation, and they need confirmation because they need to be, told that what you're doing, everything's going to be all right. What you're believing is the correct one. And because as soon as any person switches on their brain just for a couple of milliseconds, they will realize, oops, there's something very wrong here. But they
And you
don't
hear
do
a lot
that.
by Muslims themselves, right? They're encountering more and more non-Muslims, be it Christians, atheists, agnostics, or other faiths, or whatever the case is. They're coming across more and more skeptics against Islam, and they don't really know what to do. And so they're trying to turn to people like this to try and make them feel better, or give them some guidance on how to deal with these people. But these guys aren't very good at it. So whatever advice they give, and especially if they come up against somebody that knows what they're talking about or has a decent level of understanding of Islam or some critical thinking, they're going to fail badly.
Well, too. So the challenge is still standing for someone to produce something like it. How many Arab Christians would bother memorizing the true Furqan? How many of them are celebrating this as something that rivals the Quran? Like, it's actually quite odd that you even heard of it, right? Most people who are not involved in apologetics or polemics wouldn't even have heard of it. So there have been many, many such attempts. There have been many true Furqans throughout history.
The other point is the Christians don't take the Quran seriously. So who cares? They don't worry about it either way. So whatever, they don't really care about too many other books necessarily. Their main book is the Bible. So making this point is a trivial point. Christians don't care about other books. And if I were a Christian, the only thing I would care about is well, not the only thing, but the main thing I care about would be the Bible. I wouldn't take the Quran seriously in any way.
But Rob, remember what we came across yesterday, that the Quran actually goes and commands people to pay zakat. So then they go and say, well, Muslims are the number one people who are giving alms. Well, because they're commanded to do so. The same thing with the Quran. They are being commanded to recite the Quran. They are being commanded to learn the Quran. It's sunnah to go and recite the Quran and learn it by heart and things like that. Christians don't have this. They don't have this literal interpretation or understanding of the Bible. They are saying it is only in the spirit of a God. It's not literal. It's not word for word. There is a huge difference. And then to take this and then make it into a feature, I think is pretty disingenuous.
Yeah.
That have been relegated to the dustbins of history.
I'm going to try to explain my point using your rap battle analogy, so maybe you could understand what I mean.
Okay.
So let's say, for example, I go to this rap battle and with my group, and my group is convinced I'm the best. Like, I have 3 friends, they're convinced I'm the best rapper in the world, okay? And I go to this group of elite rappers, and I rap battle them, and then I leave the arena, and those rappers are never heard from again. And then me and my friends tell everyone, those rappers were like, wow, you're the best rapper. But we don't actually hear what they said. We only hear what I said they said. You understand what I mean?
I see. Yeah, that's a good point.
Dream,
But what would be even more amazing? What would be even more amazing is if all of those rappers got converted into your friends and fans and followers, right? Now we should ask the question, hey man, what changed them? What made them give up?
Sorry?
That didn't happen.
Yeah, there might have been a couple of them, but at least some, if not more than some, didn't do that. So what about those? Right. So, and all you could say about that, Sadat, is that these people, were convinced for whatever reason. Did they have good reasons to do so? And if some weren't convinced, are you going to say that they were the correct ones, or are you only going to say that the people that were convinced were the good ones? How do you establish which one is the case? And obviously, from your bias, the guys that are convinced and start following, well, they were the correct guys, right? Somehow they had better thinking, or whatever the case. And the guys that didn't follow them, they were just never going to do it. They had a seal over their hearts, or they weren't being sincere, or whatever. Nonsense. So we can play the same game. Anybody that followed him, they weren't sincere. They didn't have an open heart. Anybody can play that game. Right?
And today, 85-90% of the population is not convinced. How come?
Give up gangster rap for God rap. How did that happen, right? So that's another way of looking at it. That's a question you can ask.
Did these poets convert, or did they stay calling him a sorcerer?
They did convert. And Dream, what? There's another element.
Somebody said they did. Yeah, show the evidence, right? But of course, because there's 5-on-1 or whatever, and he hardly gets a chance to talk. The first question is, you just said they did. Show me the evidence that they did, or the majority of them did. Where's the evidence of that? You're just making another claim on top of this and hoping that nobody will ever challenge you. And in the safe space, these guys can make any single claim they want, and they're not challenged on it. And the people who are listening never hear a challenge, so they seem to think, because these guys say it with some level of certainty, that it must be true, and you'll hear them repeating it later on.
And Bob's your uncle, yeah.
This is how a cult works.
Yeah.
Make it look as if you're open to have a conversation, have 5-on-1, continually preach, make claims that you are never challenged on and never asked to bring evidence, and then at the end go, look how good we dealt with this. And now we're here with a review to just peel this back, to use Hamza's term, and we see there's nothing here. Lots of claims. They're not put under pressure. They're not challenged in any way. And they're all patting each other on the back and smiling as if they've done a good job.
Element to this as well. What if that rap song stayed number 1 for 14 centuries? Everyone else that tried to defeat.
And what if it didn't? And most of
And
the
what
world's
if it did?
population
So
dismissed it as not being the case.
Yeah, but so what if it did? It just means it's popular. It doesn't mean it's true. It doesn't mean it's convincing.
Correct.
It doesn't mean it's from a god. It doesn't mean anything. It's just popular.
Defeat that rap song.
Yeah.
For 1400 years, they couldn't. You'd have to ask a reasonable question on balance of probability.
No.
Is that really reasonable? And the difference here is, Dream, we're not talking.
I think we must remember this. If we ever get a chance to speak to Abbas, we've got to say, hang on a moment, Abbas, and we'll do whatever it is. On balance of probability, Abbas, how do you establish that this is the case for you? Because again, we do use balance of probability. So I need to remember if I ever get to speak to him again and just use these little catchphrases that they like using, but use it against them and then see how well they deal with it. On balance of probability, Abbas, if there were a mistake in the Quran, Abbas, would you suggest that on balance of probability God does not exist? If I could show you this on balance of probability, that there's a mathematical error in the Quran that is irrefutable on balance of probability, surely you would have to agree that it's not from God. Just keep throwing the claim out there like that, right?
Talking about something, in the sky, something in the clouds. You have the Quran today. We can apply the test today. We can go to Christian Arabs today. We can go to Christian authors and writers today. Okay, let's take up the challenge then. If the Quran is lying about this, take up the challenge. Subhanallah. So, as I said to you, it's a multifaceted approach. And when we doubt history, you see, obviously we should be skeptical. But when we have thousands of people ending up in different parts of the world saying the same thing, we have to ask the question.
Here we go again, making the same baseless claim as if this is a fact of the matter. And they're not challenged on it, right?
Then reasonable to accept that this never happened, or that this was just made up, or that this is wrong. And I think it's not reasonable to do that. So what you then do is you test the Quran. Okay, what's so amazing about the Quran? What's the arguments for the Quran? And when you apply those arguments and you analyze those arguments, again, I use that word balance of probability, that there is no other explanation that you can come up with other than.
Yes, of course there is.
And this is extraordinary. This must have come
and
from something outside of
my favorite? What is my favorite question? What methodology did you use to establish this?
Yeah. But even if because oftentimes I want to be as charitable as I can to see if in fact the conclusion they want to draw is in fact the case. And he said that it couldn't have come from humans. Let me just hear the last sentence he says,
capacity.
Okay, so if it wasn't from human capacity, how do you know that it wasn't some other advanced alien race that did this? How do you establish that's not the case? And now he's going to babble something, and all I'm going to say is, well, how do you know that advanced aliens that are far more intelligent than us, that can, travel faster than the speed of light through wormholes, have technology and so forth, and we're essentially like ants to them? How do you establish that we're not an experiment for them? And there's no such thing as God, and this is all just a test of these, poor evolving human beings. How do you establish that's not the case, Abbas? On balance of probability, Abbas. Because are aliens more likely to exist, Abbas, than a supernatural entity? On balance of probability, given the number of galaxies, the number of planets within a galaxy, on balance of probability, I have to suggest mathematically it's far more likely that an advanced alien race exists than your God exists. How do you establish that's not the case?
I'm sorry, Dr. Imran and Nazam, we haven't allowed you to sort of speak at all. So would you like to add anything?
No, you guys have been
Nazam
preaching
or
non-stop.
Sorry.
Don't let Dream respond to you at all, but just go around the panel so that you can all have a speech 5-on-1, so that you all get the preaching time and he can hardly have a conversation. And then you think that this is an open forum. Here we say it at the bottom, open for you guys to talk, and one person to come in and listen to your preaching.
Nazam, please.
Please, Dr. Imran.
I spoke before. I said quite. I'm sure you got something to add. I've got something. I just want to add one point, but I'll wait for you to finish. Yeah, of course.
I don't want to expose myself as being so basically. This isn't really my specialty.
Okay.
Do you want to ask me something about the Bible?
Just wait for Jason Burns. Don't worry about it. Nazam, wait for Jason Burns.
The whole thing with the balance of probability is also, I don't know. I feel like it feels like a gamble. I mean, even if it's an educated gamble where you're lucky to win, it's still a gamble in the way.
What's the gamble? What's the gamble?
That all these, even though there is a very, very, very high probability that this is true, there's still.
It's a 99.
It's not even a high probability. How did you get there, Dream? I mean, maybe you're saying even if it is, but I think you're being far too charitable. How did you establish that it's a very high probability? Why would you even think that that could be the case?
99% to 1% gamble.
Can I add something about the probability of this? So I think probability is a reasonable way of expressing this, but it's actually much more profound than that. You know how Bitcoin works?
Not the science of it.
Here we go with another analogy about how profound this is.
So it's called blockchain technology. Does anyone know how blockchains work?
Some contracts. I forgot.
So what really happens? This is sort of to summarize it, and the reason I'm using this is I'll give the analogy, and I'll tell you why I'm using this very specifically. So what happens is that somebody on a computer they request a transaction. Yeah. So a block is created representing that transaction, whatever that might be, and then that block's transmitted to all the nodes on a network. So from a PC, it's transmitted to all the nodes on the network. All the variable nodes, they validate this block and the transaction, and then that block is added to the chain, i.e. the blockchain, and then that transaction gets verified and executed. So what you have is you have a piece of information that's multiply transmitted that is then recognized by the people who it's been transmitted to and attached to a chain. That chain is verified, and this is what makes the Bitcoin such a useful currency. Is that it's very hard to manipulate this or to change it because of this verification on a network. Now, the way that we have transmission of Hadith and even Quran, really.
Oh dear, is he really suggesting the transmission is verification in the same way that blockchain is? You can't really be saying this, can he? This is why I would interrupt immediately with analogies. An analogy is only useful if the person doesn't understand something. Then you give an analogy to make it easy to understand. At any point, his dream suggests that he doesn't understand what's being said here. But that's any time you give an analogy. Otherwise, you're just preaching to your choir, and you're taking up valuable speaking time. But he's now suggesting that the way that blockchain is verified is the same as the science of Hadith and Quran. You cannot be serious.
Because it's a similar mechanism, is that we have an individual who's reciting this, and this was recited to a group of people. So as brothers have mentioned already, this is an oral revelation without an editorial process. It was just recited as it was received, and this was then verified by when some of the companions were writing this down, they would read it back to the Prophet, and he would say, yes, this is correct. So this is the initial verification of the blockchain, or the Hadith statement that may have happened. And then what happens is that this is the people who are there are witnessing it. So this is the network that's saying, yep, this is something that we understand and we know. And then this is then when it's transmitted in a similar way. We pass it on to someone else who are also part of a network which is verified from the previous chain that this is happening. And so we have, for every single step along the chain of transmission, we have multiple verifications of each step of the chain. Not just like the first bit of information on this, but every single.
Sure.
I like how Abbas is sitting there just nodding away. Okay, the question that I would ask our doctor, Imran, can you see the air quotes? Is it possible that somebody fabricates a sentence and simply copies the names from somewhere else onto the sentence and pretends like this is real? Is that theoretically possible? That's all you need to ask.
No, it couldn't have been, because everybody's verifying everybody else. That's not possible, Stops.
They're dead.
That's the claim that will be said, right? That's the analogy. So they're just going to say it's not possible.
This is
of course, we just have to ask, how do you demonstrate that's the case?
We're talking 200-300 years. This is the whole point. We're talking 200-300 years. Anybody can fabricate anything, put any names down there and say, you see, it's a verified chain of narration. The isnad is intact. So the isnad is intact, the message is intact. Therefore, it is now scientifically proven that this is correct. Because there's only two things to a narration, to a hadith. It's the chain and the contents. That's all there is.
Every single person who receives the information from the beginning to the end has been verified and checked multiply. So multiple people. So for example, we know when somebody's saying that I've heard the Prophet say this, and we know that person, we know where they learned, where they grew up, how their memory was, if they were trustworthy, were they known to miss their prayer in the masjid?
Sorry, another question. If this is true, how come we have so many contradictions between the hadith internally, externally, to the Quran, between the Quran and the hadith, and vice versa? How come?
Well, yeah. Well, they don't. You don't have any of those, of course, according to them. But you knew if they were reliable, whether they missed their prayer, etc. Perhaps what clothes they wore, what they had for breakfast.
Look at inheritance error. What happened there?
At this point, this must be comedy. But with the seriousness that he's saying it almost sounds like he believes what he's saying, or he's trying to convince himself, or the gullible audience. The rest of us were just shaking our heads here. Hopefully the rest of us who are viewing this and going, this is a wonderful story. This is like Marvel Comics. It's not even a wonderful story, though. It's just not even a good story. Right? At least there's other stories that are good. This is just making up stuff.
I prefer
Demonstrate that it's true. You've heard it from somebody else. You're repeating it, just like the guy with the text there that said, hey, all of these things, somebody else repeat. They're repeating stuff that somebody's told them. They're convinced because they already thought the Quran and Islam is true, and now they're repeating back what they've heard before.
And weaker, did it become strong? Were they when they're in the meeting when this thing was taught by this particular person? Everything is really verified. This is the network. You're verifying that particular block in the chain. And we have this going all the way back to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, for the Quran. And we also have these narrations going back to for the Hadith as well. Now, what this does is this gives this information a verifiability and a reliability that you don't find in other historical narratives. For example, we've heard of Euclid, who was a mathematician pre-Plato and Aristotle. We have his writings, maybe a few bits of things that people have recorded in their books, mathematicians, maybe 400 or 500 years later. 400 or 500 years, but we take that as coming from him because we have somebody who's verified. Now, we don't have this missing blocks. We have every single step along the way is verified multiply, like in the blockchain for Bitcoin, that this transaction is real and it's of value. This is where the value for that comes from.
You're joking. There's another hour.
So this analogy with the blockchain kind of assumed that.
Yeah, we won't get through all of this. There's no ways we're going to do all of this.
God.
We are probably.
Okay, I'm going to keep quiet now for 1 hour.
Let's just do another 5 minutes or so. It's getting a bit late. Maybe we do a part 3 on this, but at this stage, we've heard so many claims that are unverified here. We've just heard all of these guys preaching. We haven't even got to the really tough part where they really pressure him to do a conversion, right? We're not even there yet.
Oh, you've listened to
everyone on the chain.
Wow.
Yeah. I was driving or I was doing something and I just listened at 1.5 times speed. I wasn't going to listen at normal speed. That would have done my head in.
Is completely objective, but we know that all these people are Muslim and they have an objective, and that is like if something, say they see or hear something that goes against their beliefs or would undermine their beliefs, they could just not pass down the chain, and that's
so first of all this is because you're dealing with a slightly different thing now, because I'm going to come to that in a second.
Okay.
So first of all, the information that we have is verifiable in a way that other historical information isn't, to another level of verification. That's the first point. Okay.
Well, he's claiming that's not the case because these Muslims are wanting their religion to be true, so they're going to believe whatever it is, or they're going to have cognitive dissonance in favor of that. So how do you respond to that? So you're just repeating that they've got all of these things. That's not a response to the claim that he's, or the question or the critique that he's leveling.
Okay. The second point is now, okay, what you're saying is, because what you're saying amounts to a conspiracy on an unheard of level. You're saying that, because we're talking about hundreds and thousands of people now. So what you're saying is that all of these people have systematically passed on something they know to be false, and they spread it throughout history.
No, I mean, I think only the first person in the chain would have to make it false, and then everyone else above them wouldn't have any clue. They'll just take it.
There you go, right? That's a good point that he made. At no point did he say that everybody is knowingly passing on false information. You just need either the first person or somebody in the chain to make a mistake. And if there's no way to verify this and that mistake gets passed forward, you've got no way to say it wasn't, especially if this is all narration and you haven't got anything that you can actually check it with other than people's claims of saying X, Y, and Z. That's why written documentation is always better than, or most often better than, orally transmitted, because we know how fallible human beings are.
But it wasn't one person in the beginning of the chain. That's the point.
This is the thing. So when the Prophet, peace be upon him, has been raised amongst a group of people,
is the claim that every single time the Prophet made a revelation, there were multiple people that attested this there and then and repeated it over and over, and then passed it on to other people? Is that your claim? Where's the evidence that that happened every time?
People. What do we mean by that? He was born amongst them. They knew that he was orphaned. His father died just before he was born. Based upon him, his mother died when he was 6. He was a shepherd. They were known. He was raised. They knew that he was illiterate. Why? Because they'd grown up amongst them.
Okay.
They knew that he couldn't read or write. They knew what he was eating. They knew where he was living. They knew what he was wearing. They knew all of these. They already knew about him. Some of the people who were against him the most were his own family. His uncles were against him. they fought against him, battles. His family were killed, his friends were killed, people were killed who he knew that people were trying to kill him who were part of his own family. So the people who would have spoken against him, and there were people that didn't accept him even till the point that they died. But what they didn't do was say any of the things about that you said, that they didn't say that he was a liar, or that he was.
They may not have been recorded saying it. That's the best you can say. That's the best you can say. Not that they didn't say anything. Were you there? Were you with them throughout their time or their interactions? No, you weren't. At best, you can say, even if you could demonstrate that they weren't recorded saying it. That's all you can say. Not that they didn't actually say anything.
Was known to make things up, or they didn't do any of these things. Even in the times of the enemy, when they were enemies to the Prophet, upon him, they were still leaving their valuables with him as a trust form, because they knew he was trustworthy enough to return it afterwards even. So now they were...
Again, somebody could be trustworthy and wrong about the claims they make. The two are not mutually exclusive. You seem to think that he couldn't be wrong because he was trustworthy. No, that doesn't follow. He could still be mistaken and still be trustworthy in that he would give back people's things, even if, whether you can demonstrate that's the case or not, but they're not mutually exclusive.
They were opportunities. Now, after the Prophet died, there were opportunities. So, okay, he's gone now. We're no longer held by this. We can just change this and we can carry on with our lives. But they didn't do that. If you look at what the wives of the Prophet, peace be upon him, taught, they went on to carry on the message and explain the message. And even half of the religion comes from one of the wives of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and she, may God be pleased with her, passed on this. And she had an opportunity to say, you know what, I know this guy, he was fake. They could have said that, but they didn't do that. Now, so we have all this information to deal with. The other part of it, which the brother already alluded to, if the Prophet, peace be upon him, was fake, you'd have to account for where this information has come from, i.e., the accuracy of historical narrative.
No, I never claimed I think you're misunderstanding. I'm not saying that Islam is not historically based or anything. I'm saying that, for example, the stories of the poets that called him a sorcerer, we don't have their testimony. We only have, the Muslim version of their testimony. You understand?
The thing is, you have the testimony of the poets who then joined, as the example was Brother Sadat gave, who joined the rap battle.
Okay, that's a good
group.
point.
So now, what they're talking about is, before I became Muslim, this was what I did. So we have another statement of somebody who went to the Prophet, peace be upon him, to wish him, to give him whatever he might want in terms of a bribe. Look, if you want to be the richest among us, we'll make you the richest among us. We'll just pool our wealth and we'll give it to you. If you want women, choose any women, however many you want. You choose whatever you want. You want to be our king, we'll make you our ruler. If there's something wrong with you, if something's happening to you physically, let us know. We'll find the best people to treat these illnesses and we'll treat you. So they offered him everything. And what did the Prophet, peace be upon him, say? Because they can put the sun in my right hand and the moon in my left, and I cannot change from this path.
So far you get.
So all you've said is that he's convinced that what he believes is true. Why should we believe it's true? Just because somebody doesn't take bribes or whatever the case is, doesn't mean what they believe is actually true. All it shows that they're convinced that whatever they believe is true.
Are you giving me good, proofs that would, bump up the probability?
No, Dream, they haven't given you any such thing. You aren't thinking critically. You've been listening to stuff, and I appreciate they've been bombarding you with all kinds of things here. But no, they haven't given you good proofs. They've made assertions. You haven't tested it. They haven't been put under pressure on them. And it's getting late now. So stops. What do you think? Should we bring it to a close now at this point? We might be able to continue at some point, but at least we've got a lot further on here.
I think maybe jump forward half an hour and then bring it to a close, just in case because I'd love to hear this thing, because I don't think there's much point in listening to this waffling. Maybe get the pressuring and then that's it, just before he leaves.
I'm not sure exactly where it is. I mean, we can go forward a bit, I guess. Let's just have a look here, see if he's still on. Still on here. It goes until about 3:52. What are we at now? That's just under an hour still left.
Another hour, yeah.
Yeah. And I can just jump forward to any random spot, I guess. But
go there, like 3:50.
Okay.
Because I was doing exactly that. The signs were in my face. I conceded it intellectually. I had no response to it. And why was I rejecting it?
Okay, this is still preaching.
Arrogance
okay, go forward.
and vanity. And that was it.
No, this is all preaching, right? To the very end now. We can listen to the last 3 minutes preaching. Because I did say there'd be a lot of it. There's a lot of it before this as well.
Yes, as you were not lying.
And I'm doing what? Arrogance and vanity for what? And the hellfire is the alternative? No, let him. And this is why Allah is most wise, that He will give human beings, knowing they are only motivated by two things, punishment and reward. And He gives us the greatest punishment to run away from and the greatest reward to attain. And it's all to our benefit. So He encourages us to run from the fire, and it benefits us in this life and gives us paradise.
How would you establish if something wasn't for your benefit? How would you establish that? What would the world need to look like such that you could say, this is not for my benefit? I don't
As a
think I've got
reward.
an answer.
You win-win. Win-win. Right now, if you don't accept Islam, I'm just going to give you those in now. If you don't accept Islam, you have no guidance in this life. You're going to flop. You're going to be like in the ocean. You're going to be following your whims, desires. You might fall into some of the poisons. You might become victims of them. Who knows? And even if you manage to scrabble through, when you die in the end, just bear that in mind. All right, that was it. You can contact us.
Pleasure to meet you, brother.
Yeah, love
Okay, thank you for talking.
Yeah,
I
feel free to
mean,
reach
Real pleasure.
I don't have much experience. I'm 19 years old. I don't really like. I don't know how to say this.
You can contact us via email. We'd be happy to have, even if it's a private discussion that you wish, or you have more questions. But all I would say to you, brother, is that these episodes in life, when we are reminded of our existence and why we are here, don't treat it as just an accident or just some random event. This is your opportunity. This is your time. You either grab it and you take it, or you once again become engulfed in the life of this world, which Allah calls a distraction, calls an illusion that takes us away from the remembrance of Allah, and then we forget that which we were so convinced about. So treat it as something that, if it has affected you, and I hope it has affected you, treat it as a stepping stone to bring you close to Islam, inshallah.
I want to bring you, leave you with the verses of the Quran again, because I think it is best. Because I've been told by people that I need to quote the Quran more. So I'm going to give you Allah's words to you. I'm going to try to do it in Arabic first, and then I'll give you English. Okay. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Al-Haakum.
All right, we'll leave it there at the Arabic. Like I said, if you go back to 330, 340 in this particular stream, the link is in the description for those who want to. You'll hear the preaching and the pressuring of him to make the conversion and change now. What's he waiting for? And he's being convinced, and he's got all this good evidence. And as he said, he's 19, and they've provided good evidence. No dream they haven't. And I appreciate you're still young and so forth. I do hope that you're, you did ask a couple of okay questions, but I think there's a long way to go for your critical thinking to really mature and to be at a level. Not that I'm the best at it, but I've become a bit better at it because I'm focusing on it and practicing it more. It's like going to the gym. Whatever you do, you're going to be better at it than the people that don't do that, right? So, and you've come up against at least 3 or 4 of them here. Let's say the other guy was silent, so you've come into their sheep's den, and they preach that you most of the time. So, stops your closing thoughts, sir.
No, I'm just shocked. I'm shocked that people can go for 4 hours and not provide anything substantial, not provide anything that they can back up, not provide anything that they can in any way show and demonstrate that this is actually correct, and still go and say, well, we've done something like really well and blah, 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 and now you need to take your shahada. How can you expect this? This is a really piss poor performance. So, and this is exactly, now it comes down to that. If I were to go to them and say, okay, what happens if you guys fail? Who is to blame if you are incompetent and are not able to convince me that there is a God? Who is responsible? Do you take the responsibility for that? That's a very, very good question, I think, anyway.
Yeah, and on that note, let's bring it to a close. I've got some work to do, even that Sunday coming up now, 12:30 here in the UK, and wherever Stops is, whatever time it is there. So yes, thank you very much, Stops, as always, for being a co-host. Thank you for everybody who viewed it. Hopefully you learned something about how these guys operate and questions to ask them, and how we can think about certain things, and the conclusions they draw are assertions based on what they already believe. At no point did they provide any evidence, but they made it sound as if these are facts of the matter.
Yeah.
And it falls on gullible ears who will believe it and repeat it. Those, of course, are not us. And hopefully we've given you some idea of what one can do with these sort of things. These guys will never come off their channel and do it on our channel, or even on an independent channel or a neutral channel, because they would be put under pressure for their claims. And that's something that they don't want to do, and clearly aren't doing in any of these streams, because they can talk over people, etc. So on that note, we'll be back with another review, I'm sure, at some point, maybe next week, whenever Stops and I are available. Unfortunately, it's random, so we can't really tell you. But I'm sure we'll come back with another one. So thank you to Stops. Thank you to all the viewers. And we'll see you again on another review at some point. Good night.
Thanks for being with us. Good night.